Cthonia exhaled decay, a world choked on the ruins of its own greedy past. Its once vibrant skin long since rotted away to leave only the scarred, collapsed landscape of shattered tunnels, like broken ribs and mountains of gutted machinery, half-used with the perpetually choking dust. Deeper still, the gaping wounds in the bedrock, where the mines had devoured the planet's lifeblood centuries earlier, yawned faintly with the breath of the deep dark. Silent now, but vast, monumental scars, testifying to a history stripped bare and discarded, leaving nothing but desolation to swallow the present. The cities that had clung parasitically to the mine heads fared no better, their once-proud structures crumbling notch by notch under the cancerous weight of absolute neglect. Their ghost-infested streets choked not just with rubble and rusting skeletons of industry, but with the thick, suffocating detritus of a people severed, forgotten, cast adrift and abandoned by the wider galaxy, left to wither under its bleeding skies. On Cthonia, law was a ghost story, a rumor told by the weak. Reality was the brutal arithmetic of the blade and the muzzle flash, the searing certainty measured in hot lead. The ragged souls clinging to its poisoned surface didn't live. They endured, solely because the void offered no kinder ending. They were the survivors honed sharp as flint on the grinding stone of a world where violence wasn't merely a path to power. It was the very oxygen, the grim necessity of each gasped breath. The gangs were the maggots consuming the carcass, carving the desolate planet into screaming territories, eternally bleeding themselves dry over the meager scraps of influence and the empty husk of resources that turned to meaningless dust the moment they crossed the invisible borders of their own shattered, self-erected prison. Born slingshot into this screaming chaos, Ezekyle Abaddon drew his first breath not in a cradle, but in the crushing, rust-colored shadow of colossal pistons that no longer moved, and habitation blocks slowly dissolving back into oxidized grit. The true deep underhive, far below the sun's dying curse, became his twisted cradle if cradle was a word that could be applied to a place that had never known comfort, only the perpetual, gnawing void where safety was a poison trap wish. Survival wasn't an aspiration down there. It was the raw, desperate gasp stolen from the suffocating dark, the only creed. Abaddon's infancy lessons weren't etched in ink, but carved with chapped fists and scrap metal shivs onto flesh and bone in dark alleys. He fought devoid of fervor or hatred, the simple, necessary calculus burned into his marrow. Fight, shred, kill, or become part of the walls, a smear of forgotten grease. This war was his only teacher, a brutal, instinctual pedagogue devoid of mercy or philosophy. The underworld streets were his academy, each scar a lesson learned nervingding by raw nervingding. He learned swiftly that brute savagery, the screaming charge, was the ticket only to an early grave. Corpses didn't rule. Strength needed a shape, a purpose beyond the spray of arterial blood. It needed a mind to guide it. Leadership. He became a shadow, watching hawkishly, absorbing, dissecting every shift in the bitter currents of underhive politics like a predator calculating wind direction. Calculation, above all, became his bedrock. Squandering force was the weakness of the doomed. Every clenched fist, every shank slid past brittle plating, every corner ambush sprung, was a deliberate note in a deadly, silent symphony orchestrated for one outcome: victory. There was no honor singing its siren song here. Honor was a luxury buried under centuries of piled corpses and bitter ash, relevant only to the dying. Survival was the only hymn. Abaddon's inexorable ascent through the fractious gang hierarchy felt preordained, a grim elevation born of a mind honed sharper than any crude blade. He possessed a subtle, chilling ruthlessness that surpassed the lumbering ferocity of rivals. Where others wielded fear like a bludgeon alone, Abaddon layered it like a master poisoner within a broader, colder calculation. His legend, whispered not sung in those masked caverns, grew not from berserk howls, but from the measured, terrifying precision of his strikes, garrote-like tactics designed not just to kill, but to shatter, to demonstrate total, inevitable annihilation. By the time the harsh, unforgiving dawn of adolescence found him, he commanded one of the most silent terror factions within his sector. His word was butcher knife law breathed across his grim, flammable domain. Yet, even as his grip tightened on his hard-won scrap of the Undercity, as blood pooled viscous and dark around his boots a little deeper each cycle, a cold, sharpening frustration perfectly honed began to lance through Abaddon. Power had substance, true, but it possessed terrifyingly fragile borders, limits chained by the very constraints of the world that forged him. The endless, aimless gang battles offered no nourishment for true ambition. They were cyclical tragedies enacted over graveyards, meaningless struggles for petty kingship over districts destined to erode into oblivion, their value existing only as fragile constructs in the hollow minds of the desperate who clung to them like faded rags. Cthonia was a gilded cage painted in bloodrust. There were no avenues of escape from its monstrous, self-created gravity well of violence. Abaddon had inhaled every poisonous lesson the dying world could impart. Its harsh curriculum was complete. Now, a consuming hunger scraped inside him, vast and echoing as the empty mineshafts. He was fundamentally, irrevocably unlike the other warlords, those kings of the rust-heap content to preen over diminishing heaps of ash and the slow crumble of meaningless territory. His perception pierced the suffocating veil of smog. There had to exist beyond. A tangible, substantial power radiating from somewhere past the sweating, leaking ferrocrete arteries of the underhive maze, orbiting distant points of light beyond the poisonous grasp of the planet's corroded shell. The stars were impossibly remote above Chthonia's boiling ash skis, dim ghosts mocked in the murk for most, yet Abaddon's gaze had ever seen them not as unreachable beacons, but as navigation points marking a path. Destiny murmured out there, something vast waiting. The streets had forged him in survival's harsh crucible, taught him the mechanics of dominance and tactical slaughter, but they had gifted him one more profound, chilling insight. Pure animal strength was obsolete. Genuine dominion stemmed from intellect, from the cold-blooded, infallible timing of the strike, the surgeon's calculated exploitation of the swirling, shrieking chaos itself. Cthonia was raw chaos, distilled and bottled at its most toxic, waiting to be directed. And Abaddon had tamed it, mastered its primal screams. Yet ruling this pathetic ember of a realm ignited only the profound emptiness within. Power, yes, but pointless power, shackled. The wars held no challenge worthy of his honed blade, no grand design capable of filling the void. Something deeper echoed, vast and impossible to grasp, vibrating just beyond his reach. And so he waited, mastering his own coiled tension as utterly as he ruled his territory with that relentless grip. He watched, coiled. He had clawed manifest existence from the sucking void of nothing, forcing the very fabric of Chthonia's damnation to yield him space through application of sheer implacable will. Yet echoing in his bones, a siren call, he would not merely rule over oblivion. He would devour substance worthy of his monstrous forging. Whispered tales grew louder in the contaminated thoroughfares, tales spun from half-truths and static bursts filtering down rarely, stories of unimaginable distance crossed under titanic force, of entire worlds groaning as they were dragged into compliance beneath a single cosmic banner stitched with a symbol none could truly picture the Emperor's mark. To the mass of Chthonia's incurious, violent masses, ground down by the endless immediacy of their personal parochial wars, these fractured fairytales were meaningless static, background noise drowned out by the ever-present grind of survival, insignificant to the gnawing desperation of now. But Abaddon's ears were tuned differently. He caught the sibilant hiss not as myth, but as echoing resonance. They spoke not of fantasy, but tantalizing possibility. For now, however, the familiar rhythm of razor-wire conflict and the crackle of stubber fire resumed its choking tempo. Abaddon continued to thrive within its predictable furor, yet the potentiality had been sown, lodged deep in the ruthless soil of his psyche. He knew certainty. One inevitable day, the galaxy outside would finally take notice. An engine beyond comprehension would arrive to harvest the survivors, the strongest blades honed in this forgotten crucible. And when the appointed day descended, Abaddon would not merely be ready. He would meet it headlong, already stepping forward to grasp the escape pod. Chthоnia had existed for agonizing cycles as an amputated limb to the wider Imperium, its influence mere whispered rumor too faint to penetrate the dense haze of gangland savagery and brutal neglect. Life was short, defined by a slicing brutality that consumed every waking moment, leaving room for nothing beyond the next ambush, the next desperate claim for stale water, the next shallow breath of contaminated air. Yet that distilled aggression, born of necessity, made them prime harvest. This inevitable calculus lurked at the frigid edge of imperial strategic comprehension. Then, the day breached the poisoned horizon. The coming of the Luna Wolves tore the suffocating fabric of ordinary desperation asunder. Rumors detonated through the crumbling conduits like munitions smuggled into a powder keg. Warriors, touched with the celestial fire of gleaming, armor monumental figures draped in abrupt, searing white and forbidding gray. Giants, it was gasped, fallen not as conquerors perhaps, but bearing a purpose as electric and alien as their sudden existence overhead. Their arrival forced a palpable stillness onto streets accustomed only to screams and the bark of crude firearms. In the deepest, most light-starved crevices of the decaying underworld, where flickering lumens cast deeper shadows and hope, was a carcass stripped of bleached bone. The presence of the Luna Wolves momentarily stilled the perpetual, grinding engine of murder and theft. Their monstrous vessels, enormous slabs of silent might, hung suspended above the desecration, darkening entire districts under their dread silhouettes. Lifelong tunnel rats, inhabitants to whom the open sky was a myth glimpsed only as a poisonous sliver viewed through collapsing rooftops, craned necks furtively upwards, faces etched with bewildered unease, fear warring with a primal, unfamiliar pull. For the gang lords, the undisputed kings of their brittle, crumbling sandcastles, this was a jagged, dangerous unknown factor shoved violently onto their perfectly balanced boards. Uncertainty bred wary maxims. Act cautiously, but know that news like this on Cthonia rarely drifted down without a torrent of spilled blood following behind. The lanes and crumbling plazas, usually vibrating with localized violence, fell into depths of silence uncanny for their unfamiliarity as the visiting demigods traversed them. The Astartes navigated the underworld labyrinth with an unnerving silence that screamed purpose just as loud as any battlefield roar. Local warlords melted back, predators observing invulnerable apex hunters from the comforting blindness of shattered ruins, reluctant to test these newcomers, whose very silence generated overwhelming pressure. The Luna Wolves needed neither proclamation nor shouted orders. Their silent, glacier-slow procession through the decay spoke louder than thunder. They weren't here for plunder. Cthonia offered nothing but rusty nails and vicious souls, nor for plinth-building campaigns. They had come hunting a unique, unbreakable resource forged only in such intense, infernal pressure. Its savagely tempered people, carefully cultivated, lethally sculpted by the relentless press of environmental brutality, the survivors held precisely the essential qualities the expanding Imperium demanded. This was the Luna Wolves' objective, not subjugation, but harvest. Within Cthonia's countless shadowed corners, experienced killers and rising warlords carried dormant potential awaiting ascension. Ezekyle Abaddon stood sentinel among these emergent prototypes, fixed and unwavering amongst the shifting shadows. He was no skulker. Rather than shrink into the abyssal dark, he held observation lines unwaveringly, his eyes like knives dissecting the profound alteration the Luna Wolves wrought upon the exhausted, habitual rhythms of Cthonia's violent stagnation. These imposing agents of a declared emperor bore no resemblance to the gangs. Discipline exuded from them, every gesture precise, every motion purposeful. Unshakable power was their palpable atmosphere, carried on cold, metallic air. For most survivors, this arrival meant disruption, terrifying interruption bleeding into their established, agonizing existence. Gang kingpins likely held strategy councils cloaked in frantic paranoia, trying to anticipate the inevitable seismic shift required to their tenuous dominance. Abaddon processed the impact differently. Where so many apprehended only menace, inevitable predation carving through old territories, he discerned a dreadful, ultimate opportunity. They were the finally manifested shape glimpsed through yearning, the direct corridor to a future larger than the smothering confines of Cthonia, a vista where ambitions previously shackled to decaying brickwork could explode galaxy-wide. This dying world was irrevocably too small for him now. The knowledge had anchored itself painfully within him, long before their landing thrusters screamed descent. Abaddon had apprehended this core limitation, even as he coldly climbed the jagged peaks of gang sovereignty, sculpting his zone of absolute command through frost-glazed logical violence. Absolute power here equated only to threading a pirate raft through an acidic swamp, eternally at war with nearby rafts struggling over drifting toxins. Meaningless anchorage. The Luna Wolves they operated scales almost incomprehensible. They constituted the very bridge to an incomprehensible expanse. Their message propagated unspoken, yet deafeningly through applied force and silent process. They disregarded utterly the squalid internecine battles over collapsing infrastructure. They sought instead the effervescent cream of ruthlessness, extracting specifically those souls possessing the exceedingly rare alloy of cunning savagery, combined with functional, strategic intellect, those capable of thriving under pressures more extreme even than these contaminated tunnels. The teeth of a Great Crusade needed sharpening amidst genuine Bayandal horizon warfare. Abaddon tracked the invaders with complete tactical immersion, nothing spared. His mind, perpetually sculpting tactical matrices even in sleep, mapped the shifting nuances of the delicate balance their movement patterns, subtle leverage placed onto rival factions, the altered ecosystem. Unlike the crude gangs reliant on localized peer group bluster and threat exchange, the Luna Wolves projected dominance as an immutable primal fact. Their intent alone rendered conflict redundant. They commanded reality. Abaddon knew destiny as this level deployed. They would assess, identify reportedly superior talent already demonstrating inevitable dominance reflexes in localized hell pits. He mapped their likely selection logic coldly, constituted the obvious target tier for acquisition. This was precisely where his design manifested historically. Near him, lesser gang captains flinched, retreating or outright vanishing like startled rodents, incapable of formulating proactive strategy regarding godlike entities visiting their gravel pit war. They favored hiding. Assessment: delayed engagement based on risk aversion burns and fear incubation. Such tactics felt like weakness incarnate to Abaddon. Hiding in Cthonia's shadows, patience rooted in fear, unacceptable. His entire existence comprised foundationally of calculated assault, seizing necessities through projecting strength entwined with cunning misdirection. Now escape beckoned. The Luna Wolves offered the bypass he required to bolt past Chthonia's suffocatingly toxic gravity well. Escape into genuine expanses awaiting a conqueror's will applied at interplanetary scope. The pathway glared validity directly. They hunted proven fighters, orchestral conductors of necessity violence. He stood deliberately prepared to present himself as the crescendo. This response stemmed from flawless strategic assessment, acutely calibrated through experiential grind. Arrogance required vulnerability he could afford. Surviving and dominating Cthonia demanded more than animal bluster. It required sustained strategic intellect, a surgical capacity for leadership, converting actions deliberately into gains. This dense warfare forged it formulated his preparatory training curriculum. Mastery demanded graduation. Abaddon hadn't carved his path upward merely to rot interminably as chieftain overseeing worthless splinters of collapsing infrastructure. His entire ascending trajectory tested him, prepared him. The Luna Wolves personified the universal ticket away from feudal warfare cycles, grinding pointless repetition, provocative open stargates. As those galactic ascendants continued their selective hunting mission through the claustrophobic underworld warrens, Abaddon began subtle positioning taut as a coiled spring. Fear never entered logistical consideration. The assessment was mutual and inevitable. They would instantly recognize the latent potential within his haunted, merciless eyes, the impervious ambition, and precisely honed lethality forged beyond mere berserk. His ascendance was woven within destiny's finally sighting designs. When the unmistakable summons inevitably came, Ezekyle Abaddon departed Cthonia with nary a lingering step backward, his exit trajectory utterly devoid of nostalgic weight. This poisoned orbit shaped fundamental architecture, a crucible forging essential, hard absolutes concerning survival-engineered tactics and rigid hierarchies constructed for perpetual war. Yet, it offered tangible nothing appealing beyond base confinement. Cthonia equated increasingly to evolutionary stagnation, a planetary tomb productive only through ceaseless momentum, whose path eventually ran trapped facing immovable obsidian walls. Power here felt terrifyingly finite, conquest transitory as blood dissolving rapidly into bleak dirt. Endless gang versus gang struggles twisted endlessly toward nothing measurable beyond temporary survival thresholds. Liberation felt imminent, coiled promise awaiting ignition. Ignition offered upon Luna Wolves' arrival. Now they granted transcendence directly to him. Boarding the manifestation of his escape trajectory, the blunt, utilitarian Imperial transport vessel, ascending away from the corpsegrim patterns of collapsing tunnels and battered streets mired eternally in his wake. Abaddon's gaze deliberately fixed, locked forward towards navigation reticules, steered onto interstellar voids holding untamed conquest horizons. The dust lying below, good riddance. The poisoned, decaying world beneath held precisely zero anchors, not value, nor nostalgia, nor sentimental attachment. Just a root memory-haunted world colored shades red iron oxide and slick crimson fluids, therapy ground where lesson screams became instinct language whispered through cellular memory. Experiments in survival hardened into philosophy, its relevance burned away upon liftoff thrusters igniting ascent vectors. Only deep space waited, conceding possibilities, needing ruthless new tools created meticulously below. An empty lesson prison discharged now. The barren wastes and blood-soaked alleys of Cthonia were behind him now, lessons carved not just into memory, but into the very fiber of his being. He declawed his way to the pinnacle of that dying world, tasted the fleeting rot of its hollow supremacy, only to find emptiness waiting at the summit. Now the Imperium beckoned, its staggering vastness eclipsing any pitiful notoriety Cthonia could offer, and within it, his true conquest would begin, a place carved not with a serrated blade in shifting ganglands, but with the unyielding ceramite and disciplined fury of the Emperor's angels. The path to that ascension, through the Legionsguard gate of the Luna Wolves, was a crucible designed to shatter worlds far less cruel than his own. This was no mere recruitment, it was a gauntlet of transformation. The Luna Wolves stood among the Emperor's foremost legions, their standards unattainable by the weak, their brotherhood forged in a stellar furnace that reduced lesser aspirants to ash. Recruits like Abaddon, already tempered to ferocity by Chthonia's survivalist nightmare, learned swiftly that their past glories were children's games in the face of the Legion's tests. The trials unfolded relentlessly agonizing exercises that warped muscle, broke bone, and fractured minds designed for chaos. Pain wasn't the goal, it was the currency. Only those who bankrupted themselves paying it without flinching, who offered up resilience as a consistent tribute, could pass through the merciless filter. Abaddon thrived. He knew pain as intimately as oxygen. It was a breathing shadow beside him from childhood's earliest feral memories. Its jagged edge didn't frighten him now. It was a familiar presence, worn like grim jewelry. When others buckled beneath its weight, Abaddon found footing on their broken wills, pushing bodily past crippling thresholds, driven by a core of cold iron honed in Chthonia's crucible. He endured the brutal alchemy of implantation, alongside capture the flag exercises that would have massacred armies' needles that sank deep, chemicals burning his veins brighter than any Kempit explosion, surgical frames that reshaped his mortal frame into something radically other. Stone-like muscle coiled beneath scarred skin, bone was replaced with lattices of plasteel and genetic weaving, synapses sharpened, flooded with data feeds and tactical esoterica, laser focusing his entire purpose onto the path of becoming an angel of death. Yet, this metamorphosis was not solely physical. Implants delivered strength, speed, and unnatural endurance, true, but the encompassing reality, the discipline, the suffocating order, the rigid, unbreakable structure of the Luna Wolves Legion was the profound and unexpected crucible. Cthonia had been a realm of pure, beautiful anarchy, where power hinged on seizing, on stabbing before the stab came, on dominating through pure, untamed will. The Luna Wolves, for all their terrifying prowess, moved as a single, complex, disciplined instrument. Initiative bled away into obedience, individual glory became unit cohesion, power flowed not from bloody conquest in a knife fight, but from unwavering adherence to a rigid hierarchy where loyalty felt like shackles. Loyalty on Cthonia was as perishable as Fudration's, shifting with the ephemeral winds of power. Here it was non-negotiable bedrock. Discipline wasn't just expected, it was the Legion's very marrow, the spine of its strength. They fought, breathed, and exterminated as one immense, coordinated organism, each warrior a fragment of a terrifying whole, subsumed entirely within a chain of command that stretched back to the Emperor himself, that abraded Abaddon. Initially it ground bone deep against the ingrained instincts that were his salvation since infancy, the constant tactical appraisal of allies, the hypervigilance for betrayal, the ingrained posture of preemptive dominance. Obedience felt like voluntary vulnerability, a deliberate dulling of the honed edge that had kept his throat uncut. But Abaddon was intelligent, devastatingly pragmatic. He wasn't blinded by rage. He scanned this new landscape with cold, predatory calculation and understood the stark, unspoken rule rising within these monolithic ranks was impossible without mastery of their structure. He needed to learn this new dialect of power. To survive, then rule demanded adaptation. So he became a silent observer, studying his fellow aspirants as minutely as he'd studied rival gang territories. He filtered the ambitious from the merely tenacious, identified potential challengers as precisely as he'd once marked rivals for elimination. There were no ganglords here, not exactly no territories to claim with blood tribute, no petty holds over scavenged loot. Yet the air thrummed with a subtler, deadlier competition, a contest for recognition within the silent gazes of the ever-watching veterans, a jockeying for the unspoken mantle of leadership. Abaddon played this game as effectively as the knife-point politics of the Underhive. Watch, learn, calculate, strike when the advantage was his. This replay came naturally, but on a grander stage. He distinguished himself not by seeking flashy victories, but through consistent, unnerving excellence. Facing training scenarios designed to unhinge the most centered minds, he exhibited a chilling economy of action. His mind, obsidian-sharp from picturing death traps within Cthonia's warrens, dissected mock war zones with geometric clarity. Where others saw advancing lines of threat, he saw a fracture becoming a doorway. He didn't waste movement. Every lunge, parry, or Boltron placement was strategic, aimed at definitive, brutal finality. He pursued victory with the cold, efficient lethality of a lascutter through weak plasteel. Leadership, once wielded to herd desperate cutthroats, pulsed anew within the Legion's fog-shrouded training zones. He commanded disoriented squads in ambush drills, organizing chaos like a sculptor forces form from unhewn rock. The veterans witnessed this evolution. Their augmented senses tracked it all. He wasn't just another savage thug elevated to oversized armor. He possessed the quality abhorrent in a street king primal but essential in a Legion commander, a capacity not merely for violence, but for the icy calculus of achieving objectives. Ambition radiated from him, a palpable heat, yet it wasn't the blind pursuit of bloody glory. It was the focused drive for tangible control, for the leverage inherent in position and influence. They understood Abaddon desired dominion, not cheers. His hungers were familiar, shared on some baser level. They respected the predatory intelligence behind them. Gradually, the discipline ceased to be a prison. Abaddon perceived the structure as another weapon, intricate, multifaceted, unimaginably powerful. Master its treacherous pathways and locks, scale its structured heights, and he wielded not just individual strength, but the colossal, directed might of the Legion, the Imperium itself. Power flowed along prescribed channels here, controlled by those who dominated those channels. Cthonia had offered only the pittance of ruling dying rubble. The Luna Wolves offered godhood forged in stellar fire. The gang wars felt like distant squabbles over ration bars now. He ascended, not solely through muscle, though his engineered form was terrifying, but through the chilling application of a strategic mind refined by underworld brutalities, now disciplined to Legion purpose. During complex, high-intensity tactical simulations, where other recruits reacted with commendable fury, Abaddon, wearing his name Ezekyle like newly fitted armor, assessed, perpetually emanating cold calculation. One brutal scenario echoed particularly a savage close-quarters assault simulation in a fortress dungeon. Frenzied recruits charged the primary breach points, taking furious casualties within moments. Abaddon paused, became still amidst the noise, his head a tactical lens processing angles of fire, armaments and patterns superimposed on his augmented vision, instructing engagement vectors designed from centuries of Legion annihilation warfare. He saw the pattern, the looping weakness in Overwatch zones, the bottleneck expecting sacrifice. Not through the front, choked with smoke and simulated bolt-shell brace, but here, a conduit shaft ignored, a path exploited with brutal economy. Sounding commands clipped in Legion code he barely commanded deciphered, he redirected his squad, dragging reluctant warriors untouched through unexpected angles, exploiting the architecture like a vault cracker exploiting flaws in plasteel. They emerged behind mock defenders, securing the core objective before the bulk of the simulated enemy could reorient their machine gun nest squad onto the screaming frontal assault. This wasn't brute courage, this was seeing the Nifige fracture in the world and slamming an armored boot through it. The veterans saw it, recognized it as the rarest bloom, the mind not just of a killer, but of a strategist who played the battlefield like anatomic data slate game, several moves ahead. Months dissolved into relentless schedules, drill patterns under murky artificial sunlight, simulated vacuum drops, and void boarding actions punishing enough to rupture lungs, sparring rounds against cyberservitors programmed to break lesser aspirants. The veterans watched hard-faced, looking to discard anyone revealing flaws beyond redline parameters. Abaddon navigated it all, learning to transmute his initial chafing rage under commands into a seething respect for cohesion's lethal edge. Orders remain law, strict as castle wall defenses, for now. But Abaddon played a deeper game. He learned the cadence behind that law, absorbing battle doctrine with an intellect honed to survive lethal deceit. He observed how veteran sergeants positioned fire teams to maximize overlapping kill zones, how they used terrain and ration control manipulation tactics with chilling precision, how they passed down commands that sounded like prophecies designed to channel destruction. He internalized the Legion's terrifying truth. Unity wasn't softness. It was the amplifier that transformed individual terror into symphony of annihilation, overwhelming chaos with precise breakdown templates. Trust built on strength was immutable. He understood the strength inherent in brotherhood hardened not by temporary alliances against flights of a rival gang incursion at the Slag shores, but by ritual and shared genetic imperative. Other aspirants, observing his prowling presence within prescribed formation drills outside regulation armories, began naturally folding towards his orbit. In the simulated haze of war, as carnage unfolded, Abaddon's command presence emanated, positioning warriors instinctively responding as a cohesive unit. He appeared imperturbable, panic tasted alien to one raised within near-impossible odds. Signals passed from storm-lashed comlinks howled like collapsing tunnel support beams, their grim fury expressed in terse phrases disgorged through clenched teeth rebreather systems compressors hissing. His squad listened, moved in compliance without hesitation, tested formation cohesion, instantly responding to his clipped words. He radiated the unwavering projection of assuredness, an essential quality once demanded by panicked gangers facing overwhelming aggression, and now echoed against legionnaires facing simulated heavy ordnance encroachment. He became a leader not through appointment, but through inexorable gravity, a force acknowledged tacitly by aspirants and veterans alike possessing the unshakable fortitude to endure punishment fit for engines, the mind to process complex tactical dispositions like fighting gang initiation rites beneath closure-induced shook-filled caverns, and the sheer, relentless will to achieve the objective utterly disregarding the cost. The veterans continued probing, elevating him within commandists exercises simulating combat deployment deep within endless combat engagements. Sent to lead insertion teams against fierce, reactive enemy swarms, orchestrating infantry deployments to plug collapsing sections under simulated heavy bombardment, managing vital resupply chains across clogged jungle lakes indistinguishable from swamp corpses choking arteries, Abaddon executed each complex procedural task without succumbing to hesitation. Performing with a laconic precision, honed by navigating the chaotic intricacies of managing gang territories against numerous adversaries simultaneously. The cold logic and anticipatory instincts forged navigating death traps disguised as allies proved terrifyingly applicable, decoding Legion battle databases, understanding complex battlefield vectors. By his first cycle's completion within the Luna Wolves' shadowed retreat, Abaddon stood apart. He wasn't merely surviving the brutal indoctrination, he was evolving within its confines. The rigid structure, initially anathema, now flowed around and through him. Tactical procedural sequences followed instinctual rather than conscious understanding. He absorbed Legion doctrine like breath, his senses integrating decades of harsh lessons into immediate tactical extrapolation. He grasped the Legion's intricate reality. Their supreme strength arose not from singular, resplendent warriors hacking through alien hordes solo, but from absolute cohesion. Their unity became dissolution incarnate for their foes. An Abaddon intellect now encased in a weaponized, indestructible demigod frame, his resolve annealed beyond mortal comprehension by monstrous trials endured internally and externally pulverizing realities encountered within simulations, would master the infrastructure of Legion power with the same obsessive ruthlessness he'd mastered Cthonia. This was his universe now, infinitely vaster than a collapsing world's wretched labyrinthine depths. Abaddon hadn't merely arrived on the battlefield. He had already begun etching his name indelibly into its reality matrix. Just beginning to realize the future's terrifying scope, awaiting his conquest methodology, rising inevitably towards supreme command, as the legions expanded across the galaxy destroying old hatreds, annihilating entire stellar systems, for a Primarch's vision of grander accordance compliant, within immense labyrinths of grand edifices, erected upon foundations of planetary conquest, revealing yet unimaginable conflictual confrontations, demanding the keenest strategic sensibilities regarding loyal legions within the Emperor's oncoming unleashing of his cherished Imperium, destined to awaken archaic dangers marching without quarter resolving foundational questions concerning ultimate dominion over all discovered realities. The world Ezekyle Abaddon knew, the brutal streets of Cthonia where life was measured knife thrust to knife thrust, seemed a squalid alleyway compared to the vast, starsick canvas upon which the lunar wolves now painted their conquests. He stood armored, a monolith of plasteel and geniforged muscle among his new brothers, each one tempered in the same relentless crucible of the Legion's induction trials. The chaotic gang wars, his brutal cradle, had instilled a savage cunning, a visceral understanding of immediate, violent struggle. But this was an orchestrated, planet-consuming inferno. These were not raids for territory, fleeting moments of dominance soon erased by betrayal and shifting power. These were wars of compliance, their purpose as grand and terrifying as their scale, to hammer fractious worlds into the Emperor's Imperium or erase them from the stars. His baptism into this epical conflict came bathed in the fury of orbital bombardments and the grinding advance across continents. The Luna Wolves descended upon a star system coiled in defiance, its human inhabitants clinging fiercely to their independence, spitting refusal at the Emperor's binding order. That defiance marked them for eradication. For Abaddon, coiled tension waiting to strike, this was more than an opportunity to prove the worth of the agonizing discipline drilled into his bones. It was a revelation. It was here, amidst the deafening thunder of bolters and the shriek of dying worlds, that he tasted the unique, almost sacred essence of the Legion, brotherhood. It thrummed deeper than fleeting camaraderie, deeper even than the shared hardship of training. This was a kinship sculpted in the heat of mutual annihilation, in shields locked against impossible odds, in the shared rhythm of devastating advance and coordinated slaughter. Survival hinged not on the individual's lone strength, as in the miserly underhive, but on the unyielding presence of the warriors flanking you, ultramarine ceramite scraping against your own, their synchronized fusillades covering your advance, their unwavering line holding against the crashing waves of enemy fury. Trust was the bedrock of the Legion's might, a currency far more vital than life itself, for one could not be had without the other. Abaddon, for all his ingrained coldness, a wariness born of 1,000 betrayals on Cthonia, grasped this fundamental truth with icy clarity. He fought, shield beside bolter-wielding brothers whose names he barely knew, yet whose every flanking shot, every brutal countercharge, resonated with implicit, absolute reliance. Bonds began to fuse in the kiln of battle, not the soft warmth of friendship, sentimentality being a weakness burned away in the ascension to a startishhood, but an incandescent loyalty. They bled into the same mud, enacted shared destruction, and shouldered the immense, crushing weight of carrying the Emperor's will forward. In the white-hot fury of combat, they ceased to be individual warriors. They became a singular organism, a machine of destruction wheeling with terrible unity, each cog trusting the other with the sanctity of its very existence. Yet, while this brotherhood anchored him, defining his new reality, it was the magnetic, tectonic presence of Horus that truly set Abaddon ablaze with a different, fiercer fire. From the very moment he beheld his Primarch in the flesh, an unspoken current flowed between them, a recognition transcending words. Horus wasn't merely their commander, he was Genesis and Zenith, the father spirit who had summoned them into being, the lodestar guiding their conquests. The Luna Wolves, hardened killers one and all, revered him with a ferocity bordering on worship, and Abaddon understood why. Horus moved through war like its incarnate god, a strategist whose mind unfolded battlefields like sacred texts, a warrior whose presence on the line could shatter enemy morale as utterly as any graviton weapon, a true master whose command yielded victory after staggering victory. But beyond even these peerless gifts was the immense, gravity-like pull of his charisma. Legends weren't merely spoken, they lived breathless beside him, a potency woven into his every word that could bind worlds and legions with threads of allegiance thicker than voidship plate. Where others cowed through brutal intimidation, Horus inspired through sheer vision and latent power. Abaddon, whose veins sang perpetually with a burning, vaulting ambition to ascend above all others, found himself confronting a phenomenon he could not surpass. Instead, gazing upon Horus, the raw, unadulterated potentiality of controlled might personified, he felt not resentment, but a profound, soul-deep yearning to follow. Here was a purpose vast enough, a leader powerful enough to sate even Abaddon's hunger, igniting an absolute, unquestioning loyalty within his calculated soul. This respect was tectonic plates shifting within him, unequivocal. Horus represented the control over destiny, the shaping of the galaxy's future, not through crude mallets of fear, but through the elegant, irresistible sculpting of vision and will. This Abaddon admired above any lesser trophy. Horus, ever the keen predator scouting for exceptional talent amidst his already superlative pack, noticed Abaddon early in the grinding campaigns. The Primarch discerned more than just a formidable killer. He perceived a nascent leader, a mind capable of orchestrating destruction as fiercely as embodying it. It wasn't simply the brute force Abaddon unleashed upon the foe, the ruthless efficiency honed in Chthonia's crucible, that arrested Horus's attention. It was the operational depth. Abaddon saw beyond the blood spatter and detonations contouring the immediate hell. He grasped the intricate chess game of war, comprehending the necessary sacrifices, the feints, the logistics needed to sustain the relentless advance, understanding the critical interplay of strategy over mere slaughter. This emergent potential, this instinct for wielding war as an instrument of larger purpose, resonated with Horus. Recognizing that rare quality, the mind of a commander, unfolding behind the eyes of a killer, the Primarch took a personal interest in Ezekyle Abaddon, consciously nurturing the burgeoning potential flickering within the cold warrior. The opportunity to demonstrate this nascent command came swiftly on a rebellious world whose name faded into the churn of conquest. Assigned a vital squad mission securing a heavily fortified enemy supply depot, its failure potentially stalling the Legion's grinding advance, Abaddon commanded the task directly entrusted by Horus himself, a mark of burgeoning trust. He didn't surge forward with reckless Chthonian frenzy, he approached with chilling deliberation. Shadows seemed to cling to him and his warriors as they dissected enemy positions, observing patrol rhythms, cataloging weapon emplacements, mapping defensive blind spots with predatory patience. Then, the stark, brutal snicker of chainswords. Abaddon unleashed his squad with the same remorseless precision that had once instilled dread in Hivespire gangs, but now amplified by transhuman lethality. They were phantoms traversing the perimeter, layered disciplines collapsing like rotten timber under their coordinated, devastating assault. Centuries of defenders were torn apart in moments of brutal coordination. When the primary Lunar Wolves' assault wave finally thundered against the outer gates, it was Abaddon's forces erupting violently within the depot's heart, sowing utter, annihilating chaos. The depot imploded, its defenders shattered, the Legion's momentum surging forward on a tide of conquest, powered directly by Abaddon's surgical strike. This significant triumph resonated through the Legion's voxchatter. Veteran captains, warriors steeped in centuries of warfare, acknowledged the raw tactical acuity, the precognitive grasp of the battlefield flow, the uncanny ability to strike lethally at the enemy's moment of implicit vulnerability. But all other accolades dissolved before the impact upon Horus. The Primarch summoned Abaddon not long after the campaign's bitter, metallic dust had settled. Standing within the austere company of his command, Horus spoke. It wasn't the clipped communication of warlord to subordinate, it was the resonant harmony of mentor to chosen apprentice. He acknowledged Abaddon's cool command under fire, his natural imposition of will upon his brothers in the crucible. Yet simultaneously, Horus challenged him, pushing Abaddon's mind beyond the immediate tactical puzzles, stretching his gaze toward the luminous, terrifying vista of the nascent Imperium's destiny, the overarching vision for humanity itself. Horus hinted at grand designs, unfolding stratagems that would reshape the galaxy, and he saw in Abaddon a sharp-edged instrument finely tuned for the tasks laying ahead. From that critical juncture, Abaddon dwelt increasingly within Horus's orbit, a shadow absorbing the sun. The Primarch enveloped him in tactical counsels, pulling back veils concealing the monumental engines of the Great Crusade. Abaddon drank deeply this rarefied wisdom, fiercely eager to assimilate the methodologies, the layered strategies, the potent alchemy that crafted piercing loyalty out of transhuman giants. Under Horus's guiding gaze, the conqueror's instincts refined, focusing into perfect clarity. His latent potential ignited, incubated by his Primarch, and Abaddon fought henceforth with the focused, consuming fury of one who perceives the burgeoning reflection of destiny in his clenched fist. The Legion had gifted him purpose, a structure for his lethal energies. Horus bestowed upon him a blazing vision of what transcendence he could become. As the Great Crusade carved its crimson path across the void, Abaddon ascended through the Legion's near-impermeable hierarchy, his position ever closer to Horus's side. Their bond evolved beyond commander and champion. It twisted trust and ambition into a potent alloy, a mutual respect forged in apocalyptic fire and shared calculation. Together, they rode the storm of conquest, architects shaping the Imperium's form through relentless war. Abaddon, ever devouring existence for more leverage, for command, for undeniable proof of his proximity to true power, would carve ever deeper paths of carnage to prove himself worthy of standing within the reflected light of his Primarch. Abaddon flourished utterly within the Great Crusade's relentless inferno, a time suspended in constant war. The universe-spanning battles dwarfed the localized butchery of Cthonia into pale insignificance, a magnitude stretching planetary vistas and deploying titans like fundamental forces. Navigating this required something more than brutal aptitude. It demanded a warsmith's intellect capable of absorbing unthinkable data and hammering it into crushing strategies. Abaddon possessed this. His innate predatory adaptability, married immaculately with that chilling, detached tactical cortex, allowed him not only to survive but to soar with terrifying velocity through the Luna Wolves' dense ranks. Each new campaign presented alien battlefields, unforeseen tactics, implacable Xenos horrors. Each victory etched his legend deeper into the Legion's consciousness, cementing his reputation. A leader of predators, capable of snap decisions that could rupture enemy formations, born of that unique blend of Cthonian ruthlessness and burgeoning operational genius. During the Crusade's ferocious dawn, Abaddon was everywhere. Kinetic motion defined combat's edge, spearheading assaults against entrenched defense emplacements, crushing fortified hive bastions, ever grabbing for greater command, ever striving with a pervasive, ravenous hunger. Ambition was his engine, broadcast open, yet fueling it wasn't some shallow craving for accolade or glory. Glory was a transient shimmer. It was a consuming need for control, for imposing absolute, ruthless mastery over the raw galactic chaos incarnated by perpetual war. Conflict wasn't just necessity, it was the ultimate crucible of pure power, and Abaddon craved dominion, to wield that power with calculated, devastating precision. The Luna Wolves had shattered worlds like fragile glass by the time Abaddon's command star began its fatal ascendancy. His crucible arrived amidst the Hellrock of Garros, a fortress world honed over decades into an impregnable nightmare. Shielded megadomes clustered over vast subterranean cities, interlacing with countless defenses beneath kilometers of armorwork, repelling wave after imperial assault with calculated, bloody efficiency. Previous attempts bled legions dry upon its shielded lattices. Horus Lupercal, assigned the planet's abject surrender, approached the siege not as a hammer blow but a surgeon's intricate dissection. Even his genius recognized Garros demanded scalpel precision alongside overwhelming force. Enter Abaddon. Initially commanding his squad of surgical executioners tasked with severing strategic arteries, supply convoys, communication floods, isolated defense nodes, subtle needle stabs behind the fortress's skin. Small victories, to Abaddon, mere preface. He combed intelligence packets, dissecting defense schematics with a predator's discernment, hunting ingrained weaknesses others dismissed or failed to perceive. His moment ignited during the siege's grim, grinding climax. As the Luna Wolves battered the planet-destroying shields towards collapse, Abaddon seized command not of a squad, but a potent blade detachment to enact an audacity bordering on hubris. A direct thrust at Garros' central command, hive buried miles beneath titanic mountains. The gamble screamed folly. Penetrating required navigating intricate, death-laden tunnel complexes, corridors saturated in layered kill zones beneath watchful sentry guns and eager embattle mines. Failure meant annihilation, potentially stalling the entire campaign. Yet Abaddon saw the fracture point, the precise pressure application needed to shatter the edifice. He moved, arching above the tunnel network's carnage, reminiscent of his Cthonian roots stretching painfully towards lordship. His forces, extensions of his chilling will, ghosted through the labyrinthine death traps, their advance marked by catastrophic explosions and the silenced grate of ceramite grinding through obstructions. They struck Garros' strategic brain with brutal economy, crippling command protocols, dissolving coordination into panicked fugue like a single neural strike paralyzing a leviathan. Morale imploded instantly. Within days, Garros capitulated utterly. The victory marked a decisive lurch forward, shattering months of bloody deadlock. Abaddon was declared architect, his name echoing through Legion Voxnits. His flawless execution, achieved through savage intellect and decisive initiation, was precisely the savage command Calculus Horus valued above blind aggression. The summons came swiftly. Within the mobile warcrypt of Horus's stratagem, Abaddon received rare praise from his Genefather. Primarch offered more than commendation. He bestowed the raw nutrient of ambition exponentially greater responsibility, shadowing Horus deeper into the Crusade's strategic vital organs. Yet Abaddon's meteoric ignition drew friction. His cold methodology, perceived disregard for anything but the objective, the readiness to spend lives as calculated counters, bred resentment rivalries amidst commanders who favored older patterns, temperance led by precognition. Horus ignored their murmurings. He saw mirrored in Abaddon the necessary virtues he embodied, the decisiveness to make agonizing sacrifices, the absence of hesitation before the altar of overwhelming victory. This fierce hierarchy recognized and strengthened their bonds. Responsibility accumulated on Abaddon like layer upon layer of integral ceramite as the crusade churned ahead. He commanded larger war hosts, conceived complex operation stratums, earned the respect earned solely by consistent annihilation delivered victoriously. But ambition burns without fuel shortage. Command satisfied a tier, not the summit. Abaddon desired shaping the Crusade's very trajectory, imprinting his will upon galactic destiny. Horus, acknowledging the formidable tool he'd honed befit for exactly such reshaping, soon delivered. For his stellar record, his absolute reliability in applying horrendous violence directionally, Horus elevated Ezekyle Abaddon to the pinnacle, first captain of the Luna Wolves Legion, the only rank existing directly beneath the Primarch himself. The ascent was meteoric fire, a volcanic trajectory from initiate to apex, yet each plateau had been forged in relentless battle. As first captain, Abaddon assumed mastery over the Legion's devastating spearpoint, the elite singularity known as the Juster and Terminators. These entities transcended classification. Ceramited demigods sculpted into immovable bulwarks, gatekeepers unto oblivion-wielding armaments capable of planetary core immolation. Commanding the Juster and demanded more than rank. It required ruthless lethality, matching their own carved legend. These jaded veterans were peerless killers functioning masterfully, autonomously. Abaddon effortlessly garnered their allegiance by constant leadership manifested one stark reality. He strode utterly without fail at their absolute forefront thickest shellfire canopy, exploding useless against the Terminator plate beneath which pulsed his cold strategist mind. His tactics fused their innate savagery into surgical obliteration vectors. Under Abaddon's perfected command, the hallowed, terrifying Juster and Terminators didn't merely maintain lethality. They became intergalactic instruments of impossible chaos, housed within unparalleled, crushing precision. The air within the command deck of the Vengeful Spirit thrummed with a different kind of energy now, the rhythmic pulse of the voids seemingly amplified by the weight settling on Ezekyle Abaddon's shoulders, first captain. It was more than a rank, it was a transformation, a tectonic shift in the landscape of his existence, a mantle forged from the iron of Cthonian streets and bloodied by countless battlefields during the relentless grind of the Great Crusade. No longer was he merely the warrior knight, the first blade flung screaming into the maelstrom, carving a path for his brothers. That was elemental, instinctive, carved into his bones since the ruthless scramble for dominance amongst the gangs. Now gas vents hissed soft counterpoints to the low drone of strategic cogitators as he stood beside Horus Lupercal, studying the sprawling hololithic projection of a distant star cluster, worlds blinking with pathetic defiance, imperial target annotations scrolling cold data of populations, defenses, resources. The weight wasn't just physical ceramic, it was the strategic fate of the Luna Wolves' entire, a legion forged for conquest. His ambition, that restless fire that had propelled him from dust-choked Underhive brawls to an Astartes of legend, had finally found its crucible. Here, next to the Warmaster, it could bloom into true power, shaping not just skirmishes but the very campaigns that would etch the Legion's name across the stars. Horus leaned closer, his immense presence dominating the space not just physically but intellectually, the faint scent of ozone and polished metal emanating from his artificer armor as he pointed a massive finger thick and powerful, yet laden with preternatural grace towards a specific star. This world, Ezekyle, his voice resonated at a frequency that vibrated Abel's sternum, deeper than a cannon's boom, yet instantly commanding absolute silence from every soul on the bridge who strained to catch the Primarch's direction, Daggerus Prime, stubbornly neutral, harboring remnants of the Gull Eth web. They believe their seclusion protects them. He turned his head fractionally, gold-skinned face reflecting the starlight projection, ancient eyes holding depths Abel had spent decades trying to fathom, finding comradeship, wisdom, and a terrifying understanding of the brutal calculus of existence. Tell me first, Captain, how would you shatter that illusion? This was the new dimension. No field orders screamed through vox scrolls now, but the intricate chess games of galactic conquest displayed on shimmering hololiths. He worked in the shadow of the giant, no, within his radiance, a trusted advisor whispering strategy during war councils thick with the tension of competing legion masters and mechanicum, adepts hunched over piping hot logic engines, their brass limbs clicking softly. He executed Horus's vision with lethal efficiency, turning grand strategies into the brutal reality of legionary combat doctrine. He took command truly, leading not just warriors but the idea and method of the Luna Wolves. Horus trusted him like no other, a bond that ran deeper than rank, a visceral cord binding them. The Warmaster didn't see merely a soldier in Abaddon, he recognized a kindred spirit. He perceived the same relentless drive that animated his own heart, an instinctive grasp of power not as an ornament, but as a fundamental living force to be seized, sculpted, and deployed like a god-forged blade. He saw in the rising first captain an echo of his own ambition, tempered by the Legion and aimed at a future only they fully comprehended the shape of. For Ezekyle Abaddon, his loyalty remained as fixed and unyielding as adamantium, a core as hard as his Cthonian origins. Horus was worthy. He was the blazing star around which the Imperium's future would coalesce. He was the Primarch who looked beyond the immediate kill, the purge, the shattered walls, seeing the architecture of empires rising from the cold cinders of battle. As the Great Crusade ground its engines against the void, relentless and consuming, Abaddon was the spear tip and the blacksmith's hammer combined, leading his brothers from the bridge of the Justeran flagship, name echoing terror across human and Xeno star charts, always radiating purpose beside Horus, always demanding more, reaching ever harder to expand the potential of the XV-th Legion. His ascension wasn't an ending, some pinnacle achieved. It was the ignition sequence for a vastly greater engine. The galaxy sprawled infinitely before them, a staggering tapestry of stars. He knew with the chilling certainty of a seer that his destiny, inextricably bound to the Luna Wolves, lay not solely in the act of conquest itself, this stripping of freedom world by world, but in the profound, brutal reshaping of all that would come after. The street fighter in him, honed to a razor's edge on Cthonia's unforgiving stones, had always understood the hunger for power, the vital need for control, the iron fist required to grasp the top. The Astartes Legion had provided the crucible, the strict, brutal structure necessary to channel that savage ambition into a force of incalculable destructive potential. But it was solely under Horus's tutelage, shaped by the Primarch's immense intellect and Old Terra grace, that Abaddon truly began to understand power. He learned to dissect its anatomy, revealing the nerves and sinews beneath the steel. He learned how to wield it, not merely smash with it, how to feel its subtle vibrations, and translate that sensation into immutable command. He learned how to shape it, bending circumstance and perception like plasteel under a forgebeam. Most crucially, Horus revealed how to transform raw, violent ambition into something enduring the cold permanence of granite foundations, not the ephemeral smoke rising from burned cities. The signs had been visible, luminous beacons to one such as Horus, from the earliest flickers of Abaddon's rise within the Legion's bloody hierarchy. The Primarch perceived that same iron hunger for victory, a visceral need so intense it burned away hesitation. He saw Abaddon's unique capacity to make the hard, soul-scarring choices, sanctioning bombardments that spared legionaries but consumed non-combatants, ordering zone excisions, sacrificing entire companies to secure a critical orbital pylon, choices crucial for turning the tide, choices others shrank from even contemplating. Yet Horus saw more, far more. Within Abaddon's formidable skull, locked behind eyes the color of cooled obsidian, rested a mind capable of grasping complexities far beyond the straightforward geometries of battlefield deployment. Horus discerned an intellect capable of navigating the infinitely more treacherous, ever-shifting matrix of politics and high command that formed the pulsating underbelly of the Imperium itself. In young Ezekyle Abaddon, Horus didn't just find a formidable warrior, he found a mirror reflecting his own driven soul, a lethal protege, raw but possessed of frightening potential. He saw, through the smoke of war and the calculations of command, someone who could one day stride beside him not as a subordinate, but as an equal, maybe even something more. As first captain, Abaddon's burdens skyrocketed. He was responsible for the might and lives of his warrior brothers. His strategic choices, etched in formal orders transmitted via encrypted astropathic squalls, paved the way for the Legion's triumphs or paved them with corpses. The scale of his failure or success held repercussions echoing across entire subsectors. But Horus demanded things vastly beyond battlefield acumen, beyond the cold excellence in arranging legionaries as killing implements. He began to draw Abaddon deeper, far deeper, into his intimate councils. He shared secrets woven not of bolt or fire, but of the gossamer filaments and razor wires of ultimate command. He unfolded for Abaddon the colossal complexities inherent in leading not merely a legion, a single organism honed for destruction, but an empire, a teeming, chaotic entropy construct spanning galaxies. Horus possessed a mastery extending far beyond warfare's thunder. He was a consummate navigator of the endless, treacherous political maneuvers enacted upon the sprawling stage of the growing Imperium. War, the deafening chaos of stellar combat and planetary rubble, was only the tool, the application of final brute force. The Great Crusade was ultimately political doctrine writ large in fire and blood, the grand, inescapable reshaping of all human destiny under the Emperor's banner. Individual legions enforced compliance, that was their function. But behind the smoking ruins of every citadel stormed by Terminators, nestled beneath the burn scars left by lance strikes breaching city shields, lay an immensity of preludes and sequels, delicate webs of frantic diplomacy before the hammer fell, exhausting negotiations with planetary governors trembling before imperial might, the subtle, constant maneuvering within the burgeoning galactic bureaucracy, itself a psychic layer as vital and dangerous as any sword strike or last burst. Horus understood with the terrible clarity of genius that to command within this nascent Imperium, to genuinely control its leviathan weight, required seamless assimilation of this deadly balance. The blinding flash of orbital plasma destruction, synchronized perfectly with the velvet-gloved threat delivered by solar emissaries who offered words like peace against a backdrop of silent starships. He imparted these brutal truths to Abaddon, guiding him through labyrinthine lessons extending far past tomes on war as science. He began teaching the infinitely harder art, leadership as absolute dominion. Ever the lethally efficient student, Abaddon absorbed Horus's lessons with the same chilling, machine-precise focus he brought to disintegrating an enemy position with meticulously planned heavy support fire and concealed assault squads. He learned, synapse by forged synapse, how to dissect personalities glimpsed across strategy tables, thick with battle plans and antenna signals blinking urgently, how to pinpoint vulnerabilities deeper than any armored carapace vulnerabilities of loyalty flickering beneath eager oaths, susceptibilities woven into politically motivated ambitions, grander than a mere slice of conquest, or the chinks in ideological armor, concealed beneath elaborate family crests claiming ancient lineage. While many legionaries viewed Horus as a semi-divine figure, glorious yet intrinsically removed, a bright demigod inspiring awe across acres of polished plasteel deckplate, Abaddon's perspective remained rooted in shared dangers and shared burdens. He journeyed beyond reverence into profound intimacy. Horus ceased being solely his sovereign commander. He became his mentor, a guiding star piercing the bleak void, a constant pull more potent than any stellar gravity well. And deeper, achingly profound, lay the undeniable truth Horus occupied the space of father, a stern, demanding, yet undeniably present creator of his destiny. In Horus, Abaddon found the one being capable of guiding him through the crushing gravity field of command, the sole intellect that truly understood the unique agony of power, its exhausting, exhilarating necessity as the essential blood-quickening pulse of existence itself. Across the unforgiving years of relentless campaigning, this initial bond forged under pressure became a ligament fusing two souls. His loyalty to the immortal Horus transcended duty. It mutated into something metaphysical, something fundamental, the bedrock upon which his identity stood. Recept. Naturally, Abaddon revered the Emperor. How could he not? The master of mankind was the architect, the distant deity whose immutable will shattered the old night and launched this colossal enterprise, building the Imperium stone by genetic stone. But Abaddon did not know the Emperor. That name lived in sepulchral solitude on dust-laden throne-world territories ruined beyond imagining. Terra, a shimmering icon glazed in gold light so far removed from the choking reek of necrotic alien corpses piled high, or the cries of dying guardsmen amidst the burning wheat fields of yet another world brought staggering to its knees. Horus, however, was present. There, always. At the apex of the assault wave, throwing himself into the teeth of macrocannon fire during orbital breaches, standing ankle-deep in the freezing slush of enemy blood in shattered trenches, forging bonds in shared peril that mere declarations of loyalty could never replicate. He made the terrible calculus Abaddon so admired, decisions that ripped men apart to salvage legions, that sacrificed precious ships to isolate enemy formations, every step tangibly advancing the crusade and staining his own soul with the cost. Horus bled a palpable red for the Imperium he molded. He carried the soul-crushing weights, endured the storms radiating from tactical disasters, suffered a warp jump away, personally visited field hospital crypts within dead starships to offer silence to the dying and signed death oaths granting inherited honors. For Ezekyle Abaddon, it was Horus who distilled the harsh, beautiful beating heart of all they fought for. This was no declaration. It was an instinctive sensory truth dominating every battlefield, every war council laden with scared lords' planetary quailing before the Primarch's quiet intensity. And over tides of suffering years, this truth crystallized into absolute orientation. Abaddon appointed Horus his personal Polaris. His loyalty slid, imperceptibly at first, like tectonic plates grinding towards inevitable chasms. Reaching for the imperial aquila emblazoned across his plastron carried symbolic weight still, a gesture ingrained through countless dawn musters. Yet answering Horus's look across the steaming ruins of yet another capital city leveled for its defiance held the power of final benediction. It wasn't antagonism towards the distant goad-brewer, not consciously. Logic-dictated reverence remained. Avoidance remained insanity. Obedience remained imperative. Yet more time spent orbiting the searing light of the living Primarch meant intensifying perspective. The Emperor receded further, a forgotten mosaic on a distant vaulted ceiling. Horus was the immediate reality, the Warmaster sharing invaluable recollections over Recaf in cramped Vox rooms filled with dissipating cordite fumes after predation missions concluded. Horus bled onto the deck plating mere meters away when boarding torpedoes violently compromised hull integrity. He wrestled the real weight of galactic consequence directly, sporting plasma scars underneath ornate ceremonial armor that still carried faint scorch marks. He led definitively from the very edge of abyss, and his unwavering presence dissolved all doubts concerning lordship. There were moments, not many. Not moments reproduced in archive pick captures or sung by Legion remembrancers. Moments of quiet stretched tight like wire strummed nervously by anticipation's finger. Moments lingering in the dim depths of the vengeful spirit. Chronodisplays painting solemn green candle, flames on concerned faces during Stanna watches entitled Recalibration in Fleet Movement Orders. Moments freed from the shrill screams of friction-heated drop modules burning through atmospheres. In such stolen stillness, Horus's voice would resonate not as a command cascade echoed by drill-abrupt sergeants, but in quiet conviction sharing vistas painted with remarkable depths. He spoke not just scattered tactics for pending charted war zones, but the very conception of destiny itself. Not merely crusade campaigns mapped meticulously across fraying stratagem corridors, but the profound configuration of humanity's future parallels, galaxy-spanning architectures Abaddon barely dared imagine before. Horus conceived of an Imperium vibrating as one entity not shackled under terror alone, but genuinely unified under a vision shared across uncountable billions living beneath faction banners gone al-loyalist standardized. And during these piercing, galaxic exchanges, foundations solidified beneath their shared understanding. Adamantium chains became redundant ablative plating falling away to reveal profound affinity. A loyalty had emerged that surpassed obligation. Abaddon did not march for duty alone. He strode behind Horus because he believed. He possessed utter conviction in the staggering scope of the Warmaster's vision, illuminating the galaxy's untouched potential like stellar flares, revealing unseen nebulae. Loyalty intrinsically tied not to command structure alone, but to the vivid landscape evolving inside Horus' shared imagination concerning what the Imperium should become, must become. Slowly, irrevocably, a transformation more subtle than dawn's first pallor suffused Abaddon's psyche. His loyalty towards the gilded, unreachable emperor began to fracture at its deepest strata, like ancient foundations yielding to root encroachment. No deliberate act of rejection stained his conscience, merely the accumulated weight of experience settled like accreted dust centuries deep. More time spent breathing the same recycled air, as Horus revealed truths compared starkly against absence. The emperor isolated himself within golden palace grottos, choked by prosperous bureaucracies, concerning art appreciation movements on sectors drained of strategic utility long ago. Terra pulsed with its own abstract concerns far removed from world-screaming and biophage attacks. He struggled to contain fleet movements, responding too sluggishly. Horus tangled with realities so immediate they stained his gauntlets the hue of alien ichor. He struggled for the future stripped from tattered robes of proto-empires barely assimilated. Over tactile perception and untold decades grinding into eternity, Abaddon's bond with Horus mutated into unquestionable totality. Doubt became incinerated fuel vapor dispersing into galactic vacuum. He no longer interrogated its contours, analyzing brass intentions underlying orders. It simply existed, a massive gravity well his entire soul now orbited without recourse. Hesitation dissolved utterly before the Primarch's directives. Calculation became reflex. Unfolding logic reached tragic singularity. Horus embodied the future path, not the emperor confined upon Terra's jeweled crown. Ezekyle Abaddon knew, as certainly as chainsword teeth sinking deep into plasteel, he would follow the Warmaster unto oblivion. As the Crusade surged inexorably onwards, consuming worlds like ravenous stellar phenomenon, dragged across vast carts built of starship hulls welded together generation cruisers long ago, Abaddon's stature swelled beyond recognizable apex, planning the destruction of hostile Xenos fauna. He wasn't merely the controller of fate-limited squads. He was confidant numberone to Horus himself, gaining pivotal access to decisions rippling battlefield orders capable of obliterating entire alien civilizations millennia old that dared threaten constructs drafted by Terran design offices generations buried. Campaign followed relentless campaign, victory mounted upon shuddering foothills of vanquished foes, adorned newly struck honors upon his standard thicker than accolade banding worn upon his warplate visible, cross-reeking marshy landing zones beneath toxic-stained atmospheres. Each triumph saw the relentless chainmail links binding them tight further. Mentor and protege began functioning beyond initial designation. They synchronized into a unified engine of conquest and dominance, an unstoppable compound entity molding entire galactic realities, according to Horus Lupercal's immense visions, translated into protocols of absolute obedience, executed with unfailing grim precision by the pathologically loyal executioner, born beneath Chthonia's choking stone eclipses. They stood implacable, a dual force promising irrevocable change toward destinies only they understood in totality, ready to reshape whatever stars dared shine beneath their combined will. The loyalty Abaddon bore for Horus was an unbreakable thing, forged in the crucible of countless war zones, tempered in the blood of shared victories. It was absolute, unquestioning, the bedrock of his existence as first captain of the Luna Wolves. Yet a dissonant note began to worm its way into the symphony of conquest, souring the melody of faith composed for the Emperor. As the Great Crusade stretched its tendrils ever deeper into the benighted reaches of the galaxy, as world after world was brought to heel with fire and fury under the banner of the Imperium, Abaddon found his gaze turning inward, questioning the shadowed figure stationed not on the front lines amidst the thunder of war, but ensconced far away on distant Terra. It wasn't merely that the Emperor had delegated the sacred duty of battle to his sons. That was pragmatism, a necessary division of the impossible workload. It was the growing, souring detachment that festered in Abaddon's mind. He led his warriors, his brothers, onto world after world, witnessing firsthand the brutal calculus of compliance. He saw the ash-streaked faces of mortal auxiliaries moments before the artillery barrage erased them. He walked the shattered ruins of cities that had dared defiance, smelling the charnel stink of millions extinguished, feeling the pulverized stone grind beneath his boot. He saw worlds torn asunder, ecosystems ravaged, cultures eradicated, all sacrifices made, as they were told, upon the altar of unity. And for what? While these grim transactions played out across 100 battlefields, while the blood of his legion dripped cold onto alien soil, the Emperor remained silent, distant, an abstraction painted on banners hoisted over corpses. He was not leading, he was observing. Horus was invariably present, a colossus astride each battlefield, his voice ringing clear above bolter fire. Abaddon, victorious through slaughter upon slaughter, began to harbor a gnawing, corrosive thought: did he even see? Did the Emperor, cloistered within his sanctum, truly comprehend the cost? Where was the presence that was supposed to inspire? Where was the hand that ought to guide? Why burden Horus with the crushing weight of an entire galaxy's conquest? These doubts chewed at his resolve like flesh-hungry insects beneath armor, unspoken, undimmed even by the roar of triumph. The more campaigns Abaddon fought under the Warmaster's gaze, the sharper the contrast became in his soul. Horus shared their grit, endured their hardships, made the gut-wrenching calls that sent thousands to their deaths for the sake of strategy. Horus felt the immense gravity straining the sinews of command, the fatigue etched around his eyes after communion with fractious brother Primarchs jockeying for favor and resources. The vision of unity burned in Horus's eyes with the ferocity of a star going supernova. He understood the blood price. The Emperor, though. The Emperor had receded into monumental legend, becoming unreachable, a fading echo in the august halls of a palace thousands of light years, removed from the mud and agony abounding. He was becoming irrelevant to the brutal reality unfolding in his name. Abaddon's devotion to Horus solidified into unyielding rock, whilst his reverence for the Emperor eroded like sand beneath a relentless tide. Horus embodied everything a galactic leader should be: present, inspiring, intimately acquainted with the cost. In Horus, Abaddon saw the Imperium's future not as a distant master's edict handed down from an ivory tower, but as a destiny forged by strength, brotherhood, and shared sacrifice, wielded decisively in the hands of a warrior king worthy of the crown. Seeds of the deepest disillusionment had indeed been sown, slowly germinating in the darkened corners of Abaddon's psyche. Yet outwardly the first captain remained unwavering. He served the Emperor still, diligently, ruthlessly, because Horus served the Emperor. His loyalty to Terra remained, but it was intrinsically, utterly bound to his fidelity to the Lupercal. It was a loyalty now held only by a fraying cord, anchored solely by Horus's continued public fealty. Less consciously deliberated, more a visceral truth that pulsed with every heartbeat, was the conviction that the Emperor was utterly severed from the agonies endured by those bleeding to secure his dream. This smoldering resentment refused to be quenched, lurking always on the periphery of conscious thought, a serpent coiled in shadow. For now, Abaddon submerged it, channeling his formidable will into the immediate task. The Great Crusade was unfinished, a galaxy-awaited conquest, and he, Ezekyle Abaddon, first captain, would drive the Luna Wolves to victory without hesitation, extracting a toll of blood that future pacified worlds would pay in perpetuity. Yet, in the brief moments between the clang of armor and the issuing of kill orders, a question echoed, sharp and dangerous as unsheathed steel. Where was the Emperor? Why had he abandoned his sons to carry this monstrous burden alone? The Great Crusade stretched its bruising grasp across 1,000,000 stars, dragging recalcitrant worlds kicking and screaming into the light of imperial truth. Countless planets now bore the bitter scar of compliance, their histories rewritten under the Aquila's shadow. An age of conquest dwarfing any before, its pulsing heart strummed by Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the glorious Luna Wolves, the Emperor's most cherished son, trusted above all others. The bond linking father and son felt unbreakable, tempered in the cosmic forge of shared warfare and crystalline dreams of a united humanity free of old night. Yet from this dizzying pinnacle of loyalty, the Emperor enacted a pivot that would seismically shatter fate. He elevated Horus to Warmaster, naming him Supreme Commander of the Imperium's colossal war machine. For the Luna Wolves, this announcement detonated like glory itself, an affirmation swelling their Geneforged chests with pride. Their Primarch, already venerated beyond any other among the Emperor's bloodline, was now the Warmaster, entrusted with the very destiny of the Crusade. Horus had always blazed with preternatural charisma, his tactical genius an unerring constellation in the tactical void. Yet this new rank bore a crushing weight even unfamiliar to such titanic shoulders. The mantle of Warmaster wasn't mere honor, it was a skull-crushing responsibility, a burden demanding impossible steel. For Ezekyle Abaddon, Horus's ascendancy was a powerful validation of deep-seated conviction, yet simultaneously a stark challenge to his entrenched understanding of absolute authority. He had known, bone deep, that Horus was destiny's true instrument, the indispensable force thrusting the crusade forward where others faltered. Now, with the Emperor physically withdrawing from the visceral theater of war, ascending into distant bureaucracy, Horus was thrust mercilessly into a role demanding far more than mere supremacy on the battlefield. Alliances woven like poisonous spider silk between the legions needed managing. The volatile rivalries and bruised egos of brother Primarchs required constant, delicate navigation, decisions mustered with galactic consequences that would echo through millennia. Abaddon, ever the unwavering sword arm, perceived this crucible as his moment to demonstrate ultimate fidelity. As first captain of the Luna Wolves, he was already ensconced deep within Horus's inner trust. Now, with Horus ascending the dais of Warmaster, Abaddon knew his venom was required beyond the scope of Legion warfare. He fought now fundamentally for Horus, and through that unwavering conduit, for the Imperium Horus championed. Power brought intricate chains. The challenges menacing the nascent Imperium metastasized with terrifying speed. Thousands of worlds choked under the Aquila's shadow, yet resistance flared violently across the dark galactic vaults. World after world refused the yoke of compliance, or shattered it after meek submission. Legions were stretched impossibly thin, firefighting erupting rebellions a dozen sectors apart. The immense burden of propelling the dying flashbulb pulse of the Crusade forward now slammed like a hammer onto Horus's lone shoulders. Perhaps the most insidious challenge festered within the Imperium's own structure, rising tension between the legions themselves. The Primarchs, sworn to the Emperor, were as fractious and divergent as the stars under which they warred. Figures like Rogel Dorn of the Imperial Fist's epitome of rigid, undeviating loyalty to the documented Imperial truth. Others like Lemon Russ of the Space Wolves, a tempest contained only by the complex strictures of his own frenzied honor code. Consequently, their legions mirrored the schism, each legionary a refraction of their Primarch's soul. Horus now stood as the crucial pivot, the fraught arbiter tasked with binding titanic wills into a semblance of unity beneath the colossal Emperor. Abaddon, whose entire being resonated with the terrible clarity of war, the binary simplicity of kill or be killed, recoiled from these soul-grinding political skirmishes. Diplomacy tasted like thin gruel, negotiation a labyrinthine swamp. Yet, as the Warmaster's shadow, his indispensable sword and shield, Abaddon was irrevocably pulled into the suffocating vortex of Legion diplomacy. He stood grim and implacable at Horus's shoulder, as the Warmaster endured the grating squabbling of brothers consumed by their own narratives of glory. While Abaddon forcefully acknowledged the legal supremacy of the other Primarchs, his monumental contempt for their toxic, self-destructive rivalries, undermining the very crusade they supposedly bled for, was a poorly concealed brand burning within his glowering gaze. Exterior threats, seemingly untouchable, were savage shards driven into the crusade's underbelly. Xeno's empires, festering grudges reigniting, grew emboldened against the bleeding edges of mankind's claim. The Eldar, spectral and fast as starlight, became an infuriating stiletto in the Imperium's flank. Launching strikes from impossible angles, forever pursuing obscure enigmatic ends, they proved infuriatingly elusive to anticipate and crush. Abaddon spearheaded furious counteroffensives against them, his tactical wrath carving brutal order from Eldar chaos, clinching victories swift and devastating. Yet the insidious threat lingered, relentless in the shadows. Rebellion simmered as deeply as burnt bones on countless human worlds freshly compliant. Worlds brought into the fold early now buckled beneath imperial demands or remembered the fleeting taste of lost autonomy. Rebellion flared, igniting ancient grudges. Abaddon regarded such treachery with visceral disgust. Weakness repelled him, the inability to grasp the foundational glory of unity. But the sheer contagious fury of defiance rippling across star systems signaled painfully. The enemies Horus grappled with weren't solely external prowling beasts crouched outside the gates. Red-hot fissures were cracking the very bedrock of the Imperium he fought to secure. Through it all, Abaddon's fierce loyalty to Horus remained an immovable fortress. His foundational faith in the Emperor decayed like irradiated stone. The Emperor, now sedulously occupied with mysterious, inscrutable labors deep within Terra's fortress labyrinth, had withdrawn from the crimson-limbed forge in which his sons hammered out his empire. Where once the Emperor had charged resplendent alongside them, breathing palpable inspiration into their ranks, manifesting the very purpose of their grim existence, now he was a colossal haunting absence. He had formally entrusted the Crusade's future to Horus, yet in doing so it felt less like elevating a worthy successor, and more like abandoning his soldiers to stagger uphill under a colossal, world-breaking burden. To Abaddon, this crystallized into an abiding, corrosive source of incandescent frustration. His pledge had been given to the Emperor's cause, yes, binding his life and spirit. But what remained to grasp? What tangibly answered devotion? The Emperor had dissolved into symbol and obscure myth and immaterial backdrop. It was Horus who choked in the bitter gases of war-torn atmospheres. Horus who navigated the colossal armadas across reality's treacherous tides. Horus who shouldered the agonizing dread of sending billions to perish for abstract ideals. Horus who parsed the intelligence streams bleeding from 1,000 abattoir worlds and carved decisive, dreadful paths onwards. The Emperor starkly, magnificently, seemed indifferent, engrossed in realms of unfathomable power, while his children waged savage war without number. Abaddon's fundamental disillusionment deepened further as the horrors of absence propagated cancerous growth. The legions, adrift from their creator's immediate hand, fractured more visibly, rivalries between Primarchs degenerating into open contempt that poisoned strategic cooperation. The serpentine political intrigues woven inside imperial command structures grew lethally potent, rivaling the existential threat posed by external horrors gnawing at the edgeworlds. Through it all, the Emperor offered nothing: no counsel, no condemning thunder, no inspiriting decree, only stony silence. Lone, Horus strained under this impossible load. In moments stolen only between battles, deep in war-scarred stratagem compartments reeking of ozone and void suits, Abaddon grappled with these distilled doubts. How could the architect of empires, meticulously planned through inconceivable intellect, suddenly step away at the moment of peak fragility? How could he discard the very legionaries who embodied his will, leave Horus, however worthy, to navigate an ocean of blood-tinted treachery without celestial sight? Abaddon, whose fealty to Horus was structural steel, began to perceive the Emperor as an aloof architect detached from the crooked, leaky building site, lost instead in unshared blueprints for impossibly distant towers. He still clung fiercely to the glittering promise of galactic unity, the vision, but the conviction that the Emperor remained the primary, essential instrument required to grasp that blazing star was fading fast into the void. Horus, for his incalculable part, wore the crushing weight of new responsibility with a public bearing of adamantine fortitude. Yet Abaddon witnessed the costly reality. The Warmaster, born to command armies with instinctive fury, was inescapably ensnared by the arcane, lethal labyrinths of interstellar politics. The rock-like core, mighty as it seemed, accrued fissures under pressures beyond any warrior prince's preparation. Increasingly, Horus confided privations deep into Abaddon, sharing bubbling frustrations of abandonment, voicing his doubts concerning the Crusade's visible fraying edges. In this, amidst whispers near the bone, the link binding Primarch to First Captain forged truly incandescent. Abaddon's fidelity became a force of stellar impossibility absolute. As the Warmaster wrestled Leviathans, Abaddon stood implacable at his shoulder, sword trembling with readiness, soul blazing for his Primarch unto universal oblivion. But quietly internally, each unfolding disaster, each pointless tactical withdrawal forged by politics instead of primarchic instinct, each diplomatic humiliation necessitated by fractured brotherhood, eroded what remained of Abaddon's blind reverence for the absent emperor. He had revered Terra's master as the architect of impossible dreams. Now he saw only a skeleton abandoned by its own purpose, uninterested in maintaining the lifeblood in the colossal mechanism he spawned. As those seeds of corrosive doubt took terrifying root within Abaddon's heart, they sprouted tendrils twisting towards apocalypse. The ruinous transformation of Horus Lupercal, the brightest sun into the dark architect of galactic schism, began in glimpses only the alert would catch. At the dazzling zenith of the Crusade, as Warmaster, wrapping planetary systems into imperial embrace, none foresaw a chink in unthinkable dreadnought. The legions marched unstoppable under his vision, bound tighter than thought. Yet within these sequent highlights of conquest, where glory rings sweetest, the infection seeped in. Corrosion manifested when a seemingly routine compliance action upon Davin tore asunder. What was projected as swift subjugation unraveled with hideous speed into obscenity. Their designated obedient governor had snapped like rotten timber, plunging the world into rebellion illogically fierce. Thus summoned, the consummate professional deathbringers, the Luna Wolves, descended to enforce resoluteness. But the governor proved mere foolhardy vessel. The venom's source lay coiled within the darkness below Davin's corrupted earth, within the domain of the truly soulless. As Horus led the purging assault, honorable confrontation mutated into an abyssal nightmare. Davin's governor, no longer harnessing rebellion simply, swollen consumed by warp-spawn predation, turned upon the Warmaster. The governor struck traumatically, the blow bearing more than mortal steel. It dripped with Empyrean filth, a wound irrevocably tainted. Even the Luna Wolves' peerless apothecaries recoiled, their instruments and knowledge comprehensively inadequate against corruption so primal. Secret slinking in the Legion's shadowed corridors, the Lodge of Serpents clandestine, whispering, utterly divorced from imperial orthodoxy, saw chosen opportunity blooming. Masquerading as offering deliverance, their serpent-loyal elocutionists coaxed desperate command consensus. Horus, critically compromised, was conveyed under their specious guard towards the very core of their atmospheric toxic creed, the forsaken serpent temple built deep beneath Davin's malignant crust. Their priests, rumored adept at the deep arts lying outside imperial comprehension, promised salvation. What festooned in reality marked the initial invitation into damnation unfathomable. The abyss yawned irredeemably wide. This was no true mending, but the subtlest poison, a temptation served by the serpent priests, agents of chaos beneath their mantle of aid. And as Horus lay broken in fevered coma, his soul lay bare, exposed to the dark appetites lurking beyond the veil. They did not shout their malice, but whispered it, insidious tendrils coiling through his dreams, flooding his shattered mind with fevered prophecies of a future where the Emperor himself turned Judas, where the Imperium shuddered and collapsed beneath the staggering burden of its own hubris, and where Horus Lupercal alone, stripped of the Father's lie, held the key to the galaxy's salvation. These dark portents weren't mere lies, they were scalpels, cutting deep into the raw nerves of Horus's own profoundest terrors and smoldering aspirations, twisting the architecture of his very mind until the poisonous thought took root, undeniable and bitter. The Emperor had forsaken him, had forsaken all his sons. When the Primarch later stirred, eyes opening on reality once more, the physical wound was sealed, vanished without trace, yet something infinitely more terrible had breached his spirit's defenses, a malignancy embedding itself in the heart he had offered so freely to mankind. At first, the alterations were minute, nuances invisible to lesser observers, shifts in mood as fleeting as smoke. But to those who knew him best, men like Ezekyle Abaddon, whose very marrow resonated with devotion to the Lupercal, an indefinable shadow had fallen upon their Warmaster. The vibrant Horus, once luminous with conviction, now seemed bowed beneath an invisible weight, carrying a darkness within that defied comprehension. Abaddon himself was paragon of that loyalty, risen to first captain on the bedrock of unwavering fealty to Horus, and the vision he embodied, yet after Davin, he observed with a creeping, cold dread the unsettling changes manifesting in his genocide. The Horus who had commanded with open brotherhood and infectious fire became withdrawn, consumed by secrets, his decisions increasingly erratic, divorced from the precise calculus that had always defined him. Abaddon, strategist to his core, watched this descent with profound unease gathering like a thunderhead within him. Most alarming was the growing shroud Horus drew around his dealings with the Serpent Lodge, that shadow council operating within the Lunar Wolves' own veins, professing brotherhood and legion unity. Abaddon had long harbored suspicion the Order possessed hidden, fathomless depths, and now, witnessing his Primarch drawn deeper into their occult rites and secluded councils, his distrust curdled into a certainty that chilled his warrior's blood. Initially, the fierceness of his devotion to Horus forced Abaddon to swallow his disquiet whole. The notion of directly confronting the Lupercal was unthinkable, a blasphemy against the core of his being. Yet as campaigns unfolded across contested stars, Horus's conduct grew more profoundly perturbing. He withdrew from the fellowship of his Primarch brothers, making sweeping, fateful decrees without counsel, radiating an aloofness that cut like a psychic blade. Whispers began to circulate amongst the command strata, insinuations that Horus had become other, that something darker now wore his face. The grinding tension between the deep, sacred well of Abaddon's loyalty and this corrosive, burgeoning mistrust was agony. His entire existence was forged in the crucible of the Warmaster's vision of Imperium, yet that vision seemed somehow corrupted at its source, its architect fundamentally altered. He could not define the sickness festering within Horus, yet the unthinkable act turning away, abandoning the commander who had shaped his purpose, remained impossible. Abaddon wasn't stumbling through this nightmare alone. Others in the Legion, notably those untouched by the Lodge's serpentine influence, felt the dissonance too. The once unbreakable bonds of Primarch kinship began to fray like old rope under strain. Horus, beloved herald of the Emperor, now seemed governed by an agenda increasingly divergent, a path leading away from the Emperor's light. Through his profound unease, Abaddon clung to Horus's shadow, his loyalty a fraying cord not yet snapped though the fibers were parting one by one. He told himself this shadow was merely the necessary weight of leadership none but a Primarch could grasp, a burden misunderstood, that Horus could overcome whatever melancholia gripped him. But deep within, buried yet potent, lurked the horrid knowledge that this was something else, something vastly more insidious, vast and hungry. As chaos, patient and vile, tightened its coils around Horus's wounded soul, the Warmaster's own dreams mutated. The grand purpose of serving the Emperor's will dissolved like mist. Instead, the darkling whispers thrived, pouring promises of true power into his receptive mind, power not to serve unity, but to seize dominion, to reshape the very galaxy in his own design. The seed sown in the delirium on Davin had germinated in poisoned soil, flowering now into monstrous ambition and defiant rejection. His famed charisma endured, yet it curdled, draped in grim purpose, the ring of brotherhood replaced by the cold clang of impending conquest. His speeches began to frame the Emperor in terms of calculated distance, openly questioning the Lion of Terra's motives, accusing him of abandoning mankind's crusade to pursue secrets on Terra unknown and sinister. These condemnations shocked Abaddon and the trusted commanders who heard them, yet the unmovable conviction vibrating in Horus's every word gave them pause, shook the foundations they stood upon. It was then, in the war councils reserved for the innermost circle, that Horus unveiled the abyss of his intention. He rejected utterly the Emperor's dream. He saw the Imperium not as a sanctuary, but a prison, ossified, crushing humanity's potential beneath inflexible dogma. The dark gods had granted him a furious revelation, a future where he, not the absent father, ruled supreme, where his legions threw off the stultifying chains of imperial decree to forge destinies unbound by law. When Abaddon first heard these portents dropping from the lips he revered, horror gripped him like an icy fist. This was not his Horus. This was a stranger inhabiting the Primarch's form, proclaiming the dissolution of the very Imperium whose birth pangs he had overseen, whose ideals he had championed like a blazing herald. His instincts screamed denial, urged him to shout the oath they had sworn before Terra, sworn in blood. Yet insidiously, that same seduction, that intoxicating possibility of raw power, of an order born of strength alone, a future grasped with their own hands, clawed at him too. The more the altered Horus spoke, weaving his terrible tapestry of change with words that resonated in the warrior's frustrated soul, the more Abaddon felt his own certainties fissure and crumble. The Emperor had grown a spectral figure, overseeing nothing. Horus offered substance, tangible power, genuine agency over humanity's fate. And though doubt remained a cold stone in Abaddon's gut, he felt the terrible magnetism of Horus's vision. The promises of chaos proved a more potent elixir than the fading specter of old loyalty. As the rot deepened within Horus, so too did the silent war within Abaddon rage. He was the avatar of calculation, the master of tactical discipline, yet now faced the decision of eons: cleave to the distant Emperor, increasingly an irrelevance in their conquest, or follow the Warmaster into a terrifying, unknown midnight, a path offering power he could taste, but paved with the wreckage of every principle that had defined his life. The galaxy would surely vomit forth the name Istvan, etching it in the ferric stink of endless betrayal. It became the theater for the dawn of treachery, where the first act of the Worldskare was rendered onto the cosmos with blunt instruments and arterial spray, a massacre announcing the birth cry of the greatest insurrection conceivable. Abaddon had known it approached. The once-potential idea of rebellion had fermented into vengeful, strategic reality within the command bunkers. Yet even for those who had chosen their dark banners, the absolute scope of the atrocity, when it finally unfolded like a charnel blossom, shook them to the core. Horus had selected the rebellious meatgrinder of Istvan as the proving grounds for loyalty. He spun a lie painting the system as a hive of imperial defiance, justifying the deployment of his legions, but the true quarry was within his own ranks. Thousands upon thousands stood oblivious in loyalty to the Golden Throne. Luna Wolves, Death Guard, Emperor's Children, World Eaters, all marching under traitor commanders already pledged utterly to the monstrous new masters whispered of in darkness. The plan was atrocity rendered simple: command the loyalists planetside, committing them to a raging war against the supposed rebel strongholds. Once fully committed, enmeshed in glorious battle, Horus gave the silent sign. Down came the virus bombs. Death was instantaneous, universal, a holocaust unleashed on a planetary scale, as the atmosphere itself ignited into a virulent funeral pyre, consuming all organic matter in a moment of unutterable agony. It was a betrayal so profound, so black in its conception, that even those joining Horus felt its crushing psychic weight slam into their spirits. Yet some survived, filtered through the hellfire by grim luck and Astartes' endurance. Loyalist Marines, soldiers who had shared blood and bitter victories with these traitor commanders for lifetimes, now faced the impossible truth betrayed by their brothers, condemned to death in the burning, plague-riddled hellscape their own legions had made. They fought with the feral desperation of the already dead, buying microseconds of defiance. Leading the traitors down to purge these isolated remnants was Ezekyle Abaddon, first captain of the Luna Wolves, now bearing the mantle of the newly christened Sons of Horus. He advanced without mercy, hacking down warriors he had called brother only hours before. He had known what was ordained. Horus's trust extended far enough to gift him this terrible knowledge, and he had chosen, irrevocably, his path. Yet even steeled by that calculated resolve, Abaddon could feel the cold, leaden weight in his hearts as he directed his elite Juster and Terminators against men he'd known by name and deed. Discussing revolutionary philosophy in the darkness of stratagem had been abstract. This act, killing the men you had shared oxygen and agony with for a century, was visceral reality stripping the soul bare. Istvan's betrayal was swift, utter, and blood-slicked. The Loyalists fought with doomed fury, brothers against brothers, but they were isolated and outmatched by the converging tide of treachery. The brief, brutal battle concluded, leaving behind echoing silence. Istvan was rendered a toxic wasteland, civilizations reduced to funerary ash, its populace eradicated, and the galaxy, though yet unaware, now found itself dragged into an unending war. For Abaddon, Istvan VII was the fulcrum on which his existence irrevocably turned. His absolute devotion to Horus, once unbreakable crystal, was now tempered in a baptism of brother murder, and it held, yet not unchanged. The sheer horror of the act hung heavy upon his spirit, an indelible stain. But Ezekyle Abaddon was not forged in the brick of doubt or hesitation. The Emperor had abandoned them, had discarded his legions in the ashes of countless worlds for secret pursuits on distant Terra. Horus was right. The future pulsed not with the cold, distant promise of a detached God Emperor, but in the grim reality built by the Warmaster's mighty fist. Istvan had forged this truth in burning flesh and virus fire. There was no road back. The dice lay scattered, irrevocably cast. The only path remaining was utter commitment to the Warmaster's cataclysmic purpose. Abaddon's nature was pragmatic brutality. He understood this insurrection was not merely about displaced loyalty, or even the shattered statue of honor. It was about power, raw and unforgiving. The Emperor had grown soft, smug in his untouchable palace, leaving the Great Crusade's bloodwork to others. Horus offered war, utter and final, a crucible to shatter the flawed Imperium and build something infinitely stronger from its charred remains. Abaddon's faith in the Warmaster, paradoxically, deepened in the aftermath of the atrocity. Horus had proven he possessed the ruthless clarity the Emperor had lost, the steel to make the unimaginable choice, the necessary horror others would shrink from. The massacre of loyalists was brutal calculus, yes, but vital, a decisive step that cemented the foundations of the new order. Abaddon, strategist eternal, knew such absolute ruthlessness was the price exacted by the Warmaster's apocalyptic vision. Moments did come, fleeting instants in the tumult, where the sheer scale and sacrilege of their rebellion pressed down upon Abaddon's mind like Cruorphase ceramite. Decades spent fighting, bleeding, conquering worlds to build the Imperium swept through his consciousness. Now he marched in the vanguard of the force dedicated to tearing it all down, world by world. Yet Horus had persuaded him with brutal eloquence. This wasn't destruction, it was essential birth. The Imperium was riddled with weakness, founded on the Emperor's rotting fictions of unity and enforced peace. Horus offered cold, muscular truth. a galaxy ruled solely by strength's unchallenged decree, survival earned only by the ruthless and the strong. Abaddon had pledged himself irrevocably to that terrible dawn and to Horus Lupercal. Whatever doubts tried to nibble at his resolve were brutally suppressed by that burgeoning conviction. There was no space for second thoughts. The Emperor had failed the warriors who built his domain. Horus would prevail. As Abaddon's allegiance to the Warmaster petrified into unyielding resolve, a deeper, alien current began to infiltrate his thoughts, a force he could not name or truly grasp. Chaos's insidious presence had lingered since the ritual on Davin. A subtle corruption felt like a faint discordance beneath the Legion's heartbeat. Now in the charnel stink wafting from Istvan's corpse, that malignant shadow gained profound substance, coiling thicker and infinitely more demanding within the hearts of the damned. The names his brother shared hit Abaddon like shrapnel, whispered within the new, cloying closeness of Horus's inner circle entities promised to offer power beyond anything the Emperor, even the Emperor, could dream of granting. Gods of the warp. Ancient, patient, hungry. Abaddon flinched more at the word than any bolt or burst. Madness, terrifying heresy. He'd fought warp spawn, knew its predatory formlessness, knew the corruption that lurked in its smothering darkness, heard the Emperor's only sane decree. It was a tool raw and dangerous to be contained, mastered like a reactor core, not worshipped. Gods were for mortal frailty, a chain his legion had thrown off. Yet, the conviction hardening Horus's voice now bore the weight of fanaticism, a zealotry that scraped like rusted metal against Abaddon's practical soul. There was something fundamentally different clinging to the Warmaster, hanging about him like a corona of unseen, unclean energy. It wasn't merely his old ambition amplified, ambition he respected. This felt deeper, darker, as if the warp itself had offered a draft from some primal font, leaving him changed, radiating a force Abaddon's grizzled mind could not pin down, could not categorize in the clean-cut terms of war and command. And with each snarling invocation of chaos from Horus's lips, Abaddon felt it lick at the edges of his own perception, a greasy heaviness slicking the air, a whisper behind the clang of armor that wasn't sound but pure, crawling unease. It manifested not just in Horus, but in them and his brothers, a chilling unnaturalness. The proud lunar wolves were gone, shed like an old skin to emerge as the Sons of Horus, and with that dark baptism came an infection. The warrior lodges, those secretive fraternities that had once served brotherhood and esprit de corps, now pulsed with a new rhythm, a low hum of malice resonating beneath the surface. Abaddon saw it sharpening the edges of their fighting, the bursts of savage cruelty inflicted beyond necessity, the disturbing symmetry in the gruesome rites performed furtively in the labyrinthine quarters, where shadows seemed unnaturally deep and grasping. Chaos wasn't a shapeless horror at the edge of their reality anymore. It was the air they breathed. It cemented their loyalty, even as it poisoned the ground beneath their feet. He pushed back with the iron discipline forged over centuries. He needed no gods, scoffed at Horus's seeming reliance on them. But the terrible efficacy chewing through the Emperor's defenders couldn't be dismissed. Their victories felt tainted, unclean, winds that stank of rot, born less from superior tactics or unmatched courage and more from a malevolent tide rising beneath them, lending them a ferocity that bordered on the possessed. Horus basked in its power, vitalized by it, swollen with unnatural potency. And so Ezekyle Abaddon, first captain, found himself poised on a precipice above a churning, immeasurable abyss. His loyalty to Horus remained bedrock, unyielding, the core around which his fractured world still spun, yet now he was staring directly into the screaming vortex of chaos itself, recognizing that this impossible power, terrifyingly inimical to all he once knew, was irrevocably woven into the fabric of their right-now-seeming rebellion. His resistance was a futile bulwark against a rising psychic tide he could finally feel. Its shadow smothered their rebellion. His brothers were succumbing, slipping, falling prey. And Abaddon, against every pragmatic bone in his body, teetered on that crumbling edge, already feeling the awful gravity of the deep pull, bracing for the inevitable, horrifying fall. The heresy raged, the conflagration engulfing stars, planets screaming under its tread. Yet it was Terra, heavy rock orbiting Sol, Birthworld and Throneworld, that became the pyre where it would finally consume itself. Terra awaited its final slaughterhouse embrace, the siege. Terror embodied, years of secrets rotting hearts, of ambition curdling into betrayal, of chaos whispering its dark insinuations through the cracks etched by brother turning on brother, all crowding toward this single point of annihilation. Horus Lupercal, golden sun cast down, sigil-bearer of corruption and rebellion, now faced his father with outstretched talons, his gathered traitor legions a crushing, cancerous tide ready to breach the final walls surrounding the Imperium's poisoned heart. The loyalists fought like corpses ignoring their wounds, bleeding out defiance before the golden throne. For Abaddon, leading the advanced, glorious Terminator plate shedding loyalist blood and shrapnel, the siege tasted like molten ash, thick and bitter and familiar. He had carved this path with Horus since the madness ignited at Istvan, shredding the false heavens of the Great Crusade to hammer the Imperium into a form worthy of Horus's terrible new light. Decades of conquest brought them here, battering down Terra's corporeal gates, poised to shatter the palace and shove the golden corpse of the Emperor down before the feet of chaos. Terra would kneel, yet beneath the deafening barrage of orbital bombardments shaking the very bones of the planet, deeper than the tactical chatter tearing across the Vox, pulsed the low thrum of growing dread. The Loyalists weren't simply outnumbered relics. Terra summoned desperate, fanatical wasps from across the burning galaxy, blood angels screaming past death itself, white scars hacking with lightning speed, iron fists stoically immovable within unbreakable bulwarks Rogel Dorn had erected. They fought cornered animals, teeth bared red and wet, pulling teeth and blood for every inch of carnage-strewn ground. Abaddon Enyeve M. Oche Iakrakoi led the Jankari Terminator elite with his signature cold, controlled fury, a butcher pressing deeper into the Imperial sanctum, a chain-axe always singing for another kill. But this butcher felt the crushing immensity pressing down, heavier than ceramite. Numbers meant little against such bitter-ended, ground-jiving nothing defiance. Every shattered hablock seized, every blood-slicked boulevard crossed, every fortress district breached, exacted a toll painted in transhuman gore and spent bolter shells clattering over mountains of broken stone and flesh. Weeks bled into one another, the air a polluted miasma choked with the greasy reek of burning plasteel, scorched rockcrete, and the ever-present, gagging copper smell of blood, the screams of the dying a constant, horrifying treble note beneath the industrial bass of war. Horus's impatience became palpable, a psychic scream echoing down the line. The slow death grind infuriated him. His window, the chaotic alignment holding the scattered loyal legions at bay, was closing. Reinforcements crawled inevitably towards this thunderous, doomed beacon. Terrified of losing the dagger thrust at the heart, the Warmaster gambled with a desperate, chilling arrogance lower the vengeful spirit's shields. A luminous, poisonous invitation tucked within a declaration of hubris. Come to me, Father. Face the Inheritor. An invitation written in traitor blood and paid in imperial tragedy even before the teleport beams fired. As the Emperor of Mankind, flanked by Tahoma's grim stolidity and the battered angelic grace of the avenging sun materialized aboard the Spirit to meet destiny, Abaddon scraped his boots clean in the tepid, corpse-choked mud half a world away, driving the push against the Lion's Gate's stubborn defenders. He belonged at Horus's side. He should have been there. Instead, fragmented, static-threaded reports spat through the Vox, garbled cries about the angel falling, Sanguinius's light extinguished beneath Horus's, Teve a Cyrillic letter 457 favored sun giving V a lone fang to Horus's terrible new aspect. Unthinkable. Then silence, crackling ominously pregnant for crystalline moments that stretched like an eternity screamed into the void. Then the cataclysm concussed ions echoing down, Comlink spat with tales of catastrophic energies blossoming within the flagship's command deck. Horus and the Emperor locked in a warp-shadowed embrace that shattered reality within circulation blisters. Imprecise, pulsing epilepsy's data fleshed brutally with psychic feedback, the psychological bludgeoning truth Abaddon felt tearing out his black hearts long before the words crackled weak, final. The Emperor lived, violated, comatose upon a salvage throne of gold, Horus slain, obliterated, replaced by silence and eternal vacuum collapsing inward. The impact drove the treacherous ground upwards into Abaddon's skull, betrayed, discarded. His universe, the guiding star around which every victory, defeat, sacrifice orbit spun violently from its axis, radiating white blind fury eating at comprehension. His purpose, the consuming flame that sustained him deep in the untellable dark places of his soul, simply extinguished, stomped flat. Horus shattered, snuffed, killed by the withered architect awaiting disposal anyway. The rebellion convulsed, instantly pale, formless, hemorrhaging, uncountable life, meant mirrored Abaddon's inward collapse. Some shattered fragments fought still, screaming ludicrous defiance on the suburbs, surrounding the palace, falling like chaff beneath Rogel Dorn's grinding counter-wrath. Abaddon sickened saw only futility painted broad across the writhing bodies, raining burnt armor plating, and molten traitor losers' flesh above Terra's highest spires. Enough, he snarled over wrist, swinging his beak scarcely recognizable under layers of gore. The Order ragged final bitter escape into tempestuous warp boils, ordered retreat, dragging the ragged remnant Sons Horus bleeding, contaminating core loyalty identity. When its surviving leaders, hubris rotten husks, tumbled vacuously anchored soullessness, broken fighting strength fleeing, plunged into the violent hinterlands, hiding shrieking of shame and permanent defeat, clotted bedraggled vessels, limp navigating the ruinous tides, surrounding eye-blinking lurid terror, galactic scar bubbling centered churn. Foundering bulk captains replaced reflex organizing wolves, deer losing scent prey adrift, gaping psychic emptiness spilling void deep. Within Ezekyle soaked, absolute loss, thick tar immovable slump command, throne imagining Horus obliteration, Inferno, slowly kindled warmer sputtering features, settler damp ashes, beneath utility floodlights, revealed conflicted reflection, gazing hollow defeat disillusionment, recrystallizing under pressure extreme heat forging something infinitely harder, sharper, hellish. Metallica resolve sliver futures, fracture thinning light grinding, currents madness I terror, found container, nothing only relentless silent anguish cataclysmic purposes whirlpool slowly focus. Reflects the argument so flawed Horus screamed impotence, the imperial carcass prone, staggeringly weak cracked bleeding, corrupted weak despite ancient charred invalid victory Primarch, proven mortal blaze page flesh skin destiny, wrapped destiny, unclaimed abandoned emperor privileged watchman decrepit. Applicable faith perishable. Horus divine mandate, proven distractibly mortal incomplete power dramatically achievable origin wildly larger ambition, entire supremacy galaxy, choked rule imperial corpses, weakness wrought pacifiers, weakness proven fallible knife, thrust Horus power vision galaxy, forged solely strength ruthless capable, entirely worthy essence achievable echoing, abyss functional disgrace dweller broken crown terrifies, decayed throne awaited claiming forgotten servile promises obsolete. Vision crucible treason Imperium, persists fractured vulnerable perfect invasion, fortress cracking subtly corrupted machinery entropy, inevitably invited Abaddon stoic withdrawal fragmented legion, barely roused directionless leading glaciers, carrying frozen inaction, seeded irrevocable discovery independence, absolute necessary crucible treacheries, profound lesson loyalty misplaced idolized fallen idol ashes, filtered revealed genuine unchanged distilled truth, demands strength taking control. Influence currents chaos tides, remained undispersed mighty vast vessels visible salvation destruction, commenced retreat new seal craft, slipping chaotic storms periphery universe remade ruins, previous throes, open seats vacant foremost awaiting seizure patience, strategic lens existed longer, occurred Abaddon emperor endured creation, shuttered press takers, where own face glorious justifiable imperative imposed stronger, whether deserved unburdened past faithfulness virtuous restraints broken consume. Everything rebuild ascendant, Black Legion Emperor dormant watchstones, chaos gods beckoned, offering leashed instead leash pulled history, already proved form named today. Instructive zenith began truly unshed tear bloody gauntlet curled slowly command throne dark eye immersion purpose hardening, everlasting understanding awakening demanding remembrance name. Irrevocably shifted now Ezekyle silent depths, claimed dominion nevertheless trails, evidence bold aggressor needful grim resolve future horrors, embryo radiating confident malevolence, unfolding 10 millennia culminating echoes, essentially one thought resurrected shaped blazing outline iron resolve nuance phallus. Worth inheriting supremacy universe entirely conceived seen possibility, embraced future everlasting tragic seed renaissance inevitable scourge. The acrid tang of copper hung thick, choking, not from the fresh carnage around him, but from the source of Abaddon's own roiling disgust. He looked upon the broken god, upon Horus, not with sorrow, but with cold, furious clarity. Where others might see martyrdom wrought by the taloned embrace of chaos undivided, Abaddon saw only the pitiful spectacle of weakness cravenly disguised. A gullible fool ensnared. Horus hadn't sacrificed himself for glory. He'd been devoured, chewed up and spat out by the very dark gods whose hollow promises he'd suckled like a babe. That was the true horror Abaddon bore witness to, not the Primarch's brutal end, but the profound, devastating failure it represented. Horus had crumpled under the burden, let the warp reshape his purpose like potter's clay, dragging their entire rebellion Abaddon's life's purpose, his very reason down into utter calamity. Loyalty had shackled Abaddon to the Warmaster's banner, but loyalty demanded he see the truth, that he refused to plod that same ruinous descent. He would not become a puppet dancing on tendrils of half-light and shrieking madness. He would not echo Horus's desperate, doomed servitude. That initial spark of anger, a smoldering ember since Terra's burning skies, flared violently into an all-consuming inferno within his chest, a furnace demanding a new destiny, one forged clean of his former master's fatal flaws, one they would claim through sheer, unyielding will. This festering contempt finally erupted within the cyclopean hell of the Legion Wars, amidst the rending slaughter between traitor factions devouring each other within the eye of Terror's awful belly. The legions once welded beneath Horus's singular will were shattered shards pathetic warlords squabbling over fiefdoms defined by madness and ruin, a stark eclipse of the grand purpose that had hurled stars from the heavens, and the Sons of Horus, spent, adrift, a tempting carcass for scavengers hungrier and crueler. When the unspeakable elegance of the Emperor's children descended upon them in a maelstrom of sonic violation and self-indulgent savagery, it wasn't merely gravitas they flayed, nor might they shattered. They performed the final act, an insult so profound it hit Abaddon like a planet's death cry. They desecrated Horus's mortal remains, tore and defiled the pathetic shell that once housed the sovereign of chaos. That obscene violation, the absolute disrespect directed at the sacred Ezekyle Abaddon himself, was only now shattering within his own soul, became the incinerating spark. It wasn't grief that ignited his rage, but acid fury at the weakness represented, at the grotesque vulnerability that had allowed this final indignity. In a berserker's frenzy, consumed by white-hot disgust, Abaddon cut down those sons of Horus who had stood milling shadows while their father's body was befouled. Their failure was terminal. Bellowing over the stinking gore and echoing screams, he swore an oath to the shifting, shell-shocked figures that remained. No more decaying under Horus's lingering ghost. No more shadows. The Sons of Horus were extinct, obliterated today. From their dismembered corpse, something primal, something utterly new and fiercely their own would claw its way into the hell light. This searing instant, awash in betrayals, bile, and resolution's first roaring pulse, saw the Black Legion's monstrous birth cry. Abaddon had ripped the cloak of the Sons of Horus from their bones and cast the wretched identity aside like offal. They were shackled neither to the grave dust of the past, nor the howling disgrace of the heresy's crumbling edifice. The command thundered from him, paint the armor. Sink it beneath slabs of absolute, devouring black, smothering the pale gray ghosts of Luna Wolf's purity, the off-white heraldry dripping with misplaced loyalty. This black wasn't mourning, it was death and declaration. It screamed the absolute annihilation of Horus's tainted legacy and heralded a tumultuous, terrifying rebirth. They would wield the ruinous power they commandeered, yes, grasp its dread strength with hard certainty, but never genuflect to its fractured, mocking wills again. Nor the dead God Emperor's corroded dream. Their power, yes, but forged by their indomitable will, fueled by their searing purpose, divested of any master save the one who now stood inches taller than the desecrated mound left behind. Abaddon's sheer, terrifying presence, radiating violent fury, a rejection carved into the substance of the warp itself, and the scorching promissory note of a future wrenched by their own hands from the galaxy's throat, coalesced the Legion's shattered detritus. He provided twisted vertebrae, replacing cancerous entropy with a spine forged from glacial resolve. Lost warriors, fragmented survivors from other legions drifting also in the eye's whirlpool anguish, felt the immense gravitational pull of his iron determination, his volcanic strength. They flocked, moth-like, but drawn by the burning heat of ambition that promises finality, not meaningless decay. Under his stare, beneath banners newly dyed the depthless black where stars themselves died, the Black Legion crystallized. It became more than a successor force. It was an inverted monolith within the Eye of Terror, an entity that spat upon chains offered by the gods even as it harnessed the storms those gods breathed, becoming synonymous with rekindled power, with a defiance colder and deadlier than had ever been conceived amidst Luna Wolf's idealism or Heresy's ragged fanaticism. Black Legion, solidified as Abaddon's grim masterpiece, his talon upon the throat of destiny marked his true ascension. Survival, patience, simply enduring the eye's hungry tides, pathetic ends, they were instruments sharpened to lethal perfection. Abaddon's sight extended beyond the claustrophobic madness of their exile, piercing the metaphysical veil to fix once more upon the Imperium. Still stumbling, crippled by the seismic scars of the heresy, yes, but enduring like some diseased leviathan. Still monstrous, still occupying what was theirs. A direct assault now would be feudal berserk rage Horus's era, writ large in world-ash and void-carved ruins. Strategy was demanded, patience as cold as space, calculation sharper than any chain axe. To strike at Terra's corrupted heart required consolidation, rebuilt strength gathered with the cunning of a predator stalking wounded prey. Thus was the genesis of the Black Crusades, Abaddon's singular answer to the Imperium's slow, grinding rot. The first was less an apocalyptic military campaign, and more a series of ruthless probes, surgical malignancies designed by a master tactician fathoming depths beyond his father's capacity. He needed its weaknesses mapped like a necromancer reading entrails understand the Imperial Guard's brittle cohesion, the flawed bulwarks encircling the eye, the fragile threads of supply sustaining the monolithic corpse occult's decaying war machine. Simultaneously, the Crusade became a mechanized parasite, draining the galaxy of vital resources, starships gutted from orbital docks, weapons stripped from arsenals screaming with surprise, raw manpower dragged kicking or broken from doomed worlds. Each targeted annihilation, each frantic world plunged into howling service, each fleet engagement stealing thunder from battle groups meant for distant, irrelevant fronts, pumped fresh ichor into the burgeoning arteries of the Black Legion. Legion swelled not just with suns turned cybernetic horrors, but with disillusioned world eater berserkers finding discipline in his structured hate, iron warriors bringing cold logic, and countless souls who saw the black warplate and knew true, terrifying ambition resided beneath it. But above all, the first Black Crusade was Abaddon's clarion blast shattering despair. After 10,000 years hiding, feeding on scavengers' scraps soaked in the corpsolite of a fallen Warmaster, they surged forth. The Despoiler, reborn atop refused stain, had arrived. The long attrition had ended. The galaxy-spanning vengeance began. Though the strike didn't fracture the Imperium's ossified spine, it was a seismic tremor promising endless, grinding earthquakes yet to come. It proved the Legion an unstoppable scourge kindled within the Eye's furnace under his command. It was the foundational strike upon which Abaddon would build his immense, grinding long war, an assault spanning millennia, consuming lives beyond counting, fought amidst stratagems woven over epics. At its seething core always stood Abaddon the Despoiler, the architect, the will, the eternal flame, freed utterly from Horus's gravitational pull, his very name unbuckled from the legacy he'd vaporized. His creation, aligned perfectly upon the new axis he defined. And every onslaught roared forth did nothing less than amplify its strength, stoked by the Despoiler's unquenchable fury, his soul-scorching desire to strike down the rotting Imperium plague and remold reality under the crushing heel of their unassailable dominion. He followed no script writ in chaos lore. He wrote his own in blood spilled across the galaxy. Not a follower doomed to repeat another's hubris, a leader whose very name, Abaddon, became the sound collapsing worlds made before extinction, echoing with relentless purpose across the frozen stars, forged in purest, coldest fury.